Hello and welcome to the Mastermind, Body, and Spirit Show. I'm your host, Matt Belair. Today's guest is a physicist who began researching altered states of consciousness with Bob Monroe at Monroe Laboratories in the early 1970s. These early drug-free consciousness pioneers helped design experiments, develop the technology for creating specific altered states, and were the main subjects of study all at the same time. He has been a serious explorer of the frontiers of reality, mind, consciousness, and psychic phenomena for the last 40 years and continuing. In 2003, he published the My Big Toe trilogy, which represents the results and conclusions of his scientific exploration of the nature of existence. The MBT reality model explains metaphysics, spirituality, love, and human purpose at the most fundamental level, provides a complete theory of consciousness, and solves the outstanding fundamental physics problems of our time, deriving both relativity theory and quantum mechanics from first principles, something traditional physics cannot yet do. Welcome back to the show, Tom Campbell.
Thank you, Matt. Glad to be here.
I'm so excited to have you back. I think I had you almost about a year ago, and your work has come up over and over again because it's super deep. It's super fascinating. Simulation theory and that whole thing is starting to blow up, and you're one of the leaders in that. Do you want to give the listeners who might not be familiar with your work a little bit about your background? I shared that bio. You've been doing this for a long time. So maybe you can just give a brief intro and we'll dive right in.
Okay. I have a hard time doing anything briefly, but I'll give it a try. We'll see how brief I can make it. I started understanding that reality was bigger than what I had been taught in physics class when I was in graduate school, and I started with a TM meditation process. And I went to TM because it was only $25 for students, and it promised that you could get by on less sleep. And I was a graduate student at the time, and less sleep is what I needed because there was just way too much to do and too little time to do it in. So I learned TM, and about 2 months in to TM, I found that I could debug computer code in my mind much more accurately and much more quickly than I could if I was actually looking at the code. Those were in the bad old days when computer code was on punch cards, and punch cards were in long cardboard boxes. And I had maybe 10,000 cards. Every one you have to punch at a key punch. And sometimes the holes were a little off and, they wouldn't read right. So there was lots of things besides just the code that could mangle your program. And in those days, you only got maybe 1 or 2 runs a week on a university-owned computer. There was one computer there were no PCs or, computers that were easily at hand. You got in a long line in the queue, and a week may go by, and you may not even get a run on your program in a week. So you can imagine debugging was really, really important. If you're only going to get 1 or 2 runs in a week, you don't want to waste them because you left a comma off, behind a statement. So debugging was a very important thing, unlike today where the debugging is done in seconds with code, and it's a very quick process. So the ability to debug code, I just brought the code up in my mind, and all the lines that had faults in them turned red. And I just noted the lines because I had written all the code, so I knew all the lines intimately. And I'd go check those out, and sure enough, those lines had errors. And suddenly what took me and most everybody else months to do, I could do in a half a day. And that was even better than not needing more sleep. That was getting the work done, a lot faster and a lot smarter. So then I realized that reality was much bigger than what I thought, because that kind of went around all the concepts I had of reality as a physicist at that time. So it was, probably a couple of years after that, I get out of graduate school, I take a job, and I run into Bob Monroe's book, Journeys Out of the Body. Actually, my boss gave it to me. So we find out that Bob only lives 45 minutes away from, from where we were. So we made arrangements to go out and meet him. And he had just built a lab, and it was one of those, build it and they will come. He had no idea what he was going to do with this lab. He didn't have any people to work in it. It was just build a lab and they will come. He built it and we came. And I started working with Bob, just building equipment for his lab to begin with, and using myself as a guinea pig for the things that he had, which was he had some sounds, different sound things that you would listen to, and relaxation exercises and other things that would help. So the deal I made with Bob is, I'll be your scientist for free, and you teach me how to go out of body like you do, because if I don't experience it, it's not real to me. So he agreed, and myself and another guy, Dennis Menerick, who was also worked same place I did, came up with me in the same group. We started going like 15 hours a week to Bob Monroe's. It was all like a half-time job. And we were out there every evening after work and on weekends. And we brought our families out there. And Bob was good on his word. He taught us how to go out of body to where we could go out of body whenever we wanted to on demand. And what I wanted to do as a physicist was understand it. How does it work? What is it? What is an out-of-body state? Where is this reality? What is the reality? Where is it? How is it? What good is it? What can you do in it? What can't you do in it? How's it connected to our reality? What's it have to do with consciousness? What is consciousness? So that's what physicists do. They try to model reality. They try to understand how the world works. And here I was, a physicist that only knew a small fraction of what was in our reality. And now I've got this other whole doorway open to me, and I wanted to explore it. So that was my job. I was kind of theoretician of the group, trying to figure out what it was and how did it work. Dennis, he was an electrical engineer, so he worked on building equipment and progressing down his own path with it. So that was back in the very early 70s, like 1970, 71, 72. And we did that with Bob Monroe for probably 7, 8 years, putting in this half-time job. So you're looking at thousands of hours, spent in the lab with Bob Monroe as the teacher. And I gained a little bit of understanding about how it all worked. I knew it had something to do with growing up, with getting rid of ego and fear, becoming love. All that started to become obvious in time, that was a part of it. It wasn't something you did, it was something you had to be. That was the main difference. It's not in the doing, it's in the being is what's important. So anyway, and then I'll make the story a lot shorter for the rest of it. So for the next 35 or 40 years, I'm working on it. I'm spending my time doing research in the out-of-body state. I wanted to understand consciousness, its limitations, how did it work, and what it was. And the best way to do that is doing experiments inside, consciousness. If you study consciousness from the outside, like, study somebody else's consciousness or even your own in meditation, you don't get very far. But if you can travel around within consciousness, what I call the larger consciousness system, then you can actually do research there. You can do things and they have effects here, and then you can do them again and see if the effects are consistent and what are the variables, and if you change this variable, how does that affect the change of what happens here? And it's just a lot of painstaking research, trial and error, trying to figure out how this thing worked. So in 2003, I thought I had some idea how it worked, and I wanted to write it down. And I wanted to do that because writing it down forces you to be clear in your thinking. Most of us, when we think, are very fuzzy in our thinking. We're not too exact, but when you have to write it down, there's no such thing as a fuzzy sentence. Your sentence says something or it doesn't. It's a very clear and precise instrument if you write in decent, whatever your language is, in my case, decent English. So it forces clarity. And I found I had all kinds of holes in my in my thinking, and my ideas and things that were incomplete and things I really didn't understand, because when I tried to write them down, it was like, well, I really don't know what I'm talking about here. It's all hypothetical, and I need to do some more work. So writing the books was about a 5-year process. And in that 5-year process, I did a lot of learning and, again, a lot of exploring and researching. And then I thought that I understood it well enough to write these books. I thought maybe after a while that I'd have enough material for a book. And then I thought I'd have material for more than a book. And pretty soon I had so much material, I had to break it into 3 pieces. Otherwise, I would have had a book with 1,000 pages in it, which would have been too hard for anybody to lift off the shelf. So I broke it, and that's why I ended up with a trilogy. Then it had been published for about a year or so. And what it is a model of consciousness, was what it was. It was a scientific model of consciousness that was the results and conclusions of all of those years that I spent trying to figure it out. So about a year or two after I publish it, I get some aha moments that say, this very same principles, ideas, and concepts that I have based my theory of consciousness on also explain quantum mechanics. Oh my God, so I looked at it. I mean, I'm a physicist. I should have gotten that right away, but I missed it entirely. And then when I finally got it, I said, well, look, it's exactly the same thing. The same thing I'm using to explain how consciousness works explains why quantum mechanics works, why particles should be probability distributions, which is a big mystery in physics. And then I started thinking, well, if I can explain quantum mechanics and physicists can't explain quantum mechanics, then what about the other big mysteries in science? And immediately jumped up relativity. Relativity theory, like quantum mechanics, is based on an assumption that nobody understands how it could be that way. With quantum mechanics, the assumption is that particles are probability distributions. What's that mean? Particles are probability distributions. See, that doesn't really make a lot of sense, but with that assumption, you can compute correct answers with quantum mechanics. But the assumption itself is a mystery, why that should be true. In relativity, the mystical assumption there is the velocity of light is a constant. Why should it be a constant? Nothing else has a constant velocity like that. Everything else, velocities are additive. If you have the source moving, then the light from the source should be moving not only at its speed, but also the speed that it gets from the moving source. But light isn't like that. Doesn't matter how its source is moving. It always goes exactly the same speed. C is the letter we denote speed of light with. So why is C a constant? Well, again, just like in quantum mechanics, if you make that assumption that C is a constant, oh, well, now you can derive relativity theory. It's just based on that fact as its fundamental, that's the fundamental fact in relativity. And physicists had no idea why C should be a constant. And my consciousness theory was screaming the answer. It said, of course, C has to be a constant, couldn't be anything else. Look, it falls right out of the virtual reality. And virtual reality, or I should say that our reality is information-based. That's another way of saying virtual reality. Was a fundamental tenet of my consciousness theory. So I ended up realizing that I could do better physics. And after that, I started looking at all of the paradoxes in physics, the things that physicists know because experimentally they verified it's like that, but don't know why. There's a lot of paradoxes in physics. Some of the more obvious ones are, where did the Big Bang come from? If our whole universe is all there is of reality, and our whole universe evolved from a Big Bang that was a ball of plasma at high temperature and high pressure, where did that ball of plasma come from? Didn't come from our universe because our universe hadn't evolved yet, you see. So it had to come from outside of our universe, but that doesn't really make sense. So it's another one of these paradoxes. And physics is littered with these kinds of paradoxes, some big like that in cosmology, some small things. But anyway, I found out that consciousness theory derived a more complete physics. And that was really a good thing. I was really, I grinned about that for probably a couple of months because I'm a physicist and I saw the two coming together. I had known that they must come together somehow, but I didn't really know how before that. And the reason I say that is I knew that consciousness was fundamental. My studies in consciousness told me consciousness is fundamental. Physical reality is secondary. It's a product of consciousness. And you can get that just from experimenting with your consciousness. That's a fact. Well, so I knew that physics had to come from consciousness in some way. I just didn't know that it was that easy, that it was that obvious. It was just sitting there in front of me. And then when I saw it, it was just another verification that the consciousness theory was good theory because it indeed could explain quantum mechanics and relativity, which is what Einstein called a TOE. A theory of everything was a theory that could explain both quantum mechanics and relativity. Well, there it was, and they both fall right out of consciousness. And the physicists, Einstein included, knew that relativity and quantum mechanics were both just parts of something bigger, but they didn't know what that bigger thing was. As it turns out, that bigger thing is consciousness, you see? So that kind of ties it all together. So then things like consciousness is not a strange thing. There is no hard problem there. Consciousness is not created by brains. Consciousness is more fundamental than the physical. So that kind of opened up a whole new way of looking at life. So the next thing I did was say, well, if this is the case, maybe I can come up with some quantum mechanics experiments that help verify this theory of mine. And I did. And I came up with a set of, actually it's like 17 or 18 experiments, but it boils down into about five different fundamental experiments. So I have these 5 experiments and I had them crowdfunded. We did a Kickstarter program last May and pulled in about $236,000 to do the experiments. We're in the process of doing that. We're looking for physicists and institutions, that will take that on. We've built up a nonprofit called CUSAC, Center for the Unification of Consciousness and Science. So anyway, we've just been working hard now at trying to get these experiments done and have some physical scientific hard evidence that reality is this way. And I think we will be successful when we get those done. So that's coming in the next year or so. So that's kind of from the beginning all the way up to what's happening now. What's happening now is we've got these quantum mechanics experiments that hopefully in the next year we will get those completed and done and be publishing the results. So that's kind of who I am and where I started. And I guess there's one other thing that I should say. I mentioned in the beginning that you find out when you travel this road that it's really not about doing, it's about being. And you begin to change going down this path. And as you grow up, as your reality expands, as all the things, well, I shouldn't say all the things, but many of the things that people call paranormal just become normal, because within the consciousness viewpoint, they're just normal things. They only are paranormal or kind of, beyond normal, above normal, if you have a materialistic viewpoint. Then they're not normal at all. They're paranormal. But if you understand consciousness, they're just normal. And when you live in a larger reality and you have a deeper understanding of the way things work, it just naturally brings you to a personal growth where you understand that what's important is very fundamental choices that you make your choices with love, with caring. It has to be about other, not about self. And that being self-centered, gimme, me, oh, what do I want? What can I get? And how can I keep it? When your life centers around those kinds of things, your life is unsatisfying and it's generally unpleasant. And there's a lot of fear and a lot of pain. And my consciousness research kind of also evolved not only the nature of consciousness, but what we're doing here, who we are, why we're here. And what is this? What is this physical reality? You know, where did it come from, and why is it here, and why are we in it? And when you answer all those questions, you know, I could probably talk for 6 hours just on those questions, but to come to the bottom line of it, we're here to grow up, to become love. That's why we're here. We're here to make choices, and by those choices, we lower the entropy of our consciousness, which means we have spiritual growth. We begin to care about other more than ourselves. We become love. So it's not about acting. It's not about acting kind or acting loving. It's about being kind and being loving. And those two things are vastly different. Acting comes from the intellect. You can act any way that you think you should, or the way that makes your image be the way you'd like it to be, or whatever your motivation is. You can act it, but that is completely different than being it. When you act kind, you're constantly thinking of, well, would that be a kind thing to do? Should I do that, or should I do this other thing? Oh, there's a little old lady needs help across the street. Well, I see a lot of people are watching me. I think I'll help her across the street, because then I'll look really like I'm kind. You see that, and then I'll tell everybody when I get to work about how I helped this little old lady across the street. You see, that's all coming from the intellect. That's about you, your needs, your need to be kind. But you're really not kind. You're just acting kind. Because if you were kind and you saw that little old lady, you wouldn't think about anything else other than she needed help, and you could help her, and you would help her. And it's not a matter of, should I do this? Will it make me late for work? You know, do I have the time? Does she really need my help? I guess you'd always think that, you know, you don't want to help somebody across the street that really doesn't want to be helped. But you would think of it in terms of being of service, and not in terms of whether or not you are doing the right thing. You just do the right thing without thinking about whether or not you're doing the right thing. You see, it's a difference between being and acting. And when we talk about, I think we're going to get into the subject here about collective consciousness, and what makes a collective consciousness, and how does one form it, and where do they come from, and how is it organized, and how much power does it have, and where does it get its power? And I can answer all those things, and the answers to those are yes, there is such a thing, and yes, it can be powerful, or it can be weak, and how and why it's either powerful or weak. And we'll talk about all those things. But one of the major things that we'll be talking about then is this difference between acting and being. You see, you can, again, act like you're kind, not at all the same as being kind. You can act like you are evolved and caring and full of peace and light, but that doesn't mean that you are. There's a big difference. And with the collective consciousness, it's not about what you think that matters. It's about what you are that matters. And with how much energy and force is that being. Your being can be with more or less force, have more or less impact. So I guess that's it in a nutshell. So I didn't want everybody to think it was just about science and, you know, consciousness theory and physics theory, and it's all kind of pie in the sky, and who really cares anyway? You know, if you're not a physicist or a scientist, then that all, you know, so what? You know, let's get back to the real world. But it's about the real world. The most fundamental part of this is really not the science. It's not the physics. That's good. We're going to rewrite all the physics and science here in the next few years, but that's not really what's important. What's important is that we understand this bigger picture of our reality and learn to become love, learn to care about other people. That's what's important. So that's kind of the main message, not the physics. The physics is what gets talked about a lot, but it's the metaphysics. It's the loving and the caring that is really the core message in My Big Tao.
Tom,
So that's it.
Amazing. It's so good, man. Like I appreciate you so much. And it's so fascinating because you can go physics conversation with all the physicists on the planet, all the brilliant people. I can't do that. But what I love is that the point is about what you're doing in actual reality. Like, what does it mean? Like, we can get into crazy physics, but this is the message. And what I found fascinating about our first conversation was that it all went to the highest level spiritual understandings. Like, you had like Zen mastery and no mind and connecting with a bigger consciousness. You had, spiritual principles, religious principles of like, do no harm, things like that. Everything that your work actually ties in to like the highest level spiritual principles, which is really interesting. And, we can go so many different ways with this because you can just talk about everything. It's very fascinating. But I think it's interesting that I spent the summer studying. I talk about him a lot with a Native American elder of the Mi'kmaq named David Lobert Senepas, who's a mathematician, he's an engineer, he's a scientist, but he's a spiritual scientist. And so he's a very fascinating character. But when you're talking about being and thinking, like being and acting, that's one of his main things. One of his first teachings is do 3 acts of kindness a day. And in doing the actual action, so he'd talk about love. He's like, love is great, but in kindness, you can actually measure it. And so you have to actually go be that way and not think it. And one of the expressions he used once at a talk was, a lot of you are so heavenly minded, but you're no earthly good. When he's done speaking, and he's spoken to thousands of people around the world, he's met with the Dalai Lama, you know what I mean? He's done all that stuff. He's like, when I'm done talking, like, go give $1 to your homeless, go do something for someone. And, that's, he can go kind of out there with the science, but it's always very grounded in the principles. And what I would just get you to do is just continue on with like the consciousness theory, because I'm just so fascinated about all of it. So wherever you want to dive deeper, like, where does consciousness originate? If you want to talk about the global effect, because it gets into very interesting things when you think about, for me, from a sports background, I learned that if you visualize a backflip in extreme sports, you are more likely to land that backflip. Then you go a step further and you have work like Dr. Joe Dispenza, whereas like if you can get into a state, you can cure your body of different things. You have the story of Sadhguru, where I think he said he fractured his leg and then he used consciousness to heal himself. And then you've got stories of like Yogananda and ascended masters, and like, yeah, I'm floating around on a doing all these things. And you're like, well, how the heck did you do that? What does that even mean? So I didn't really formulate a question, but I'm wondering if you can go into more like, for you, what is consciousness? What is this bigger consciousness, and more into your theory?
Okay, well, I can go into it from the scientific viewpoint of what is consciousness and the structure and how does it work and that sort of thing. Or I can go into it from the experiential viewpoint of being and growing and what is it like to be fully conscious? So we can work at it from both ends. But tell me where you want this to go. You understand your audience and what it is they're interested in, and
Well,
we can go there.
Yeah, I think people would be interested in both. I know like the Unify Network is watching right now, and it's a beautiful network of amazing people. And what they've done is created these global synchronized events, on the theory like Roger Nelson and the Global Consciousness Project. And there's a study of the group of monks meditating. I think it was in Chicago. Somebody can pull that up, I'm sure. But there's a group of monks meditating on peace, and they lowered the crime rate, things like that. So they're kind of taking that idea of like putting people into action and community. And like, if we're in a hologram, I was talking to Adil, he's one of the founders, or the founder, and he's an amazing human, talking about like, if we can project a hologram, if we're in our own hologram and we can use consciousness to kind of affect it, what effect could we have together in group consciousness? And that's what they're studying at Global Consciousness Institute and things like that. So I'm curious your thoughts on that. That might be a good angle to go.
Okay, so we'll start there. One of the fundamental things to come out of this theory of consciousness that is required by the theory, and the theory has lots of things that it logically requires as I developed the theory. And one of them is that as a feedback to this virtual reality that we call a physical universe, there is this arrangement in consciousness that our intent modifies future probability. Okay, now the future is not deterministic. The future isn't done yet. It's still open. It can change. It can go any number of different ways. So there is probability that it might go, let's say if there's 10 different states that this future event might end up in, you know, it might do this, it might do that, it might do something else. And these are maybe 10 different ways that this future event could take place. Well, each one of them has a probability. Some are more likely than others. Some may be very unlikely and some may be very likely. And these probabilities can change as we put our intent toward a very, you know, an outcome. Okay, that is, now I'm skipping like, you know, 12 hours of lecture on, you know, why this is a logical, necessary thing about consciousness. And I'm just jumping right into it, you know, making a statement, you know, like it is a fact, but it does have a logical derivation. But that's just the nature of our reality in this virtual reality. It's the way this virtual reality, our physical universe, is set up. That's part of it. And it's not just done that way because somebody wanted it that way. It's a necessary logical part of the structure. Okay, it has to unfold that way. So I'm not talking about magic. I'm talking about actually logic and science. And this turns out to be one of those facts of the way things have to be. So you can change the future probability of something with your intent. That is how people heal with their minds. The probability that you're going to be healthier in the future rather than sicker in the future, it goes up. And we also can make ourselves sick when we're worried and we have fears about, you know, oh no, I've got a, you know, a lump on my neck and, you know, what is that? And maybe it's cancer. And then you get very worried about it. And then you tell your friends and they get very worried about it and your family gets worried about it. And pretty soon you have 20 or 30 people in your circle of people you know, and they're all fearful about the lump. Well, that just puts lots and lots of energy to that probability of it being cancer. You see, you're raising the probability of that happening. So it works both ways. You can use your intent to get rid of someone's headache, just to modify that probability. You can use your intent to give someone a headache. It's just the way reality works. Okay, so that's intention. Now, intention, we're going to get back to that acting being thing. Intention can be weak or it can be powerful. What makes an intention weak is that it comes from your intellect. Okay, you can make a wish. You can throw a penny in the wishing well and you can wish for something. And that has very, very little effect on future probability because it's coming from the intellect. It's not coming from a deep place. It's not coming from your being level. It's coming from your intellectual level. And that is a weak place for an intention. Okay, the intents that come from your being level are much more powerful. Now that's a level that reflects what you are, who you are, what's inside. You know, we talked about you can act kind or you can be kind. If if what you're doing is being kind because you are kind, then that's the powerful state I'm talking about. That carries a lot of power. If you're acting kind, that doesn't carry much power. Okay, so it's the same with your intent healing or your intent reducing the crime rate in some city or anything else. You can modify that future probability, but you have a more powerful intent if it comes from your being level. Your being level is that core of you, that part of you that represents you at the deepest, most fundamental level. Okay. Now, most people don't really even know they have a being level and they wouldn't know what it was. And, you know, they struggle with that, you know, because they live out of their heads and their intellect defines their reality and their attitudes and so on. They live out of their intellects. And when you live out of your intellects, you have a tendency to live out of your ego and out of your fear and out of your beliefs. And you begin making all your choices because of your fear, ego, and beliefs. It's really the motivation behind your choices. All of that is very weak intent. Now, um, another thing that affects the quality of your intent or its ability to actually change things is your focus. The average person has a focus of their consciousness, of their will, is just full of noise. Their mind just jabbers on and on and on about all the little things going on in their life, and feelings and emotions and slights and upsets and conquests, and what they're gonna do Saturday night, and just all sorts of things. And one of the things we learn how to fix that is to meditate. Meditation is about quieting the mind, getting rid of the noise, being able to stay in a still, quiet place without thoughts for a fairly long period of time. Okay, that's getting rid of the noise. So you cannot have a very powerful intent if your mind is noisy, because you can't really focus it. It's your intent's flying around and a dozen things all at the same time. Most of them all out of the intellect, most of them out of the ego and the fear and the belief, and it's just your consciousness potential is just being wasted that way. It's like leaks. You got leaks all over. Your consciousness energy is just kind of pouring out in no typical way or form or format. It's not powerful. So that's another way that you can make your intention more powerful, is having a tight focus, getting rid of the noise. And the next thing it takes what is your basic, most fundamental motivation? Why are you doing what you're doing? What is the point of it? Why are you doing it? And if we tell ourselves, oh, I'm doing that because I like to help little old ladies across the street because I'm a good person, you say, well, that's pretty weak. If you're doing things, you help that little old lady because you really couldn't think of doing anything else. It's just the way you are. You don't think of yourself as a good person. You just think of yourself as a person, and you do what you do as you do it. You're not particularly judgmental about yourself. You just are. You just do. You be. You're authentic. You help little old ladies across the street, not because you see yourself as a good person. That's you trying to create an image of yourself in your own mind, but because you are a kind, caring person, and you see this old lady needs some help. So that's the third thing, is why are you doing it? Are you in service of your ego and your fear and your beliefs, or are you just being kind and caring and loving? So if you're coming from a good place, then that gives your intent a lot more power. So these are several things you see that make a difference. So I think it was called, I don't know, some decades ago, the Maharishi effect, where people got together, and I think it was done out of the TM has a college, has a university somewhere. Dr. What is it? Heglin, or somebody is a part of that, a physicist who is also an integral part of TM. And they ran a project where they tried to change crime statistics in various places and other sorts of big picture things, and they were successful with it. Well, you can be successful with it. It's just probability. You can change the probability of the way things happen, and probability of your healing, even the probability of being happy. You see, you can change the probability of whatever. You're just changing how reality is going to be. You can also do the opposite, or I can say not the opposite, but you can use that for ill as well as for good. If you are one of these people who is constantly fearful, life sucks, everybody sucks, everything is awful. You hate being here. It's a miserable place. Everybody's greedy and nasty and trying to grab, and the politicians are all crooked, and on and on and on and on. So you've got this sense of despair and unhappiness, and how miserable you and everybody is, and how there is no way out, et cetera, et cetera. Well, you help create that. That puts power and energy into that being the reality you live in. You create that reality. So what does that mean about us? That means when you just look around, read the papers, watch the news, go walk down the street, and what you see out there is a very accurate representation of the quality of we humans. All right, you see a lot of greed and nastiness and violence. Well, that's what we are. We have a lot of, we have a lot of self-centeredness and fear in us. We have a low quality of consciousness. And that behavior isn't them acting badly and poor you have to put up with it. That behavior is us. It's us as a collective consciousness. We create this reality by modifying probability of future events. That's feedback. If you want to know how you're going, look at your life and ask a few questions. Am I happy almost all the time? Am I positive? Do I almost never experience upset, anger, annoyance, anxiety? Are all of those things very foreign to me? And the things that I experience almost all the time are joy and peace and caring and satisfaction, and everything just seems to be good and great. Well, if that's the way you are, then you are more highly evolved. You've grown up. You have, less fear in your system. But if you say, no, sometimes I get angry, sometimes I really get upset and I get annoyed and I'm fearful about things, well, that means you have ego, you have fear, you have beliefs, and that is your problem, not the outside world. You can only change yourself. And you can provide an environment that makes it easier for others to change themselves, but you can't change anybody else. And that environment that you can give somebody else to make it easier for them to change themselves is an environment of safety, of caring, of compassion, where they feel so loved and protected and taken care of and liked that they can afford to kind of stretch out past themselves. They can afford to take chances because they're in this safe place. They can afford to be differently. You see, that allows them to change themselves. So that's how you can help other people, by getting your own mind, healthy and without fear. Then you are an example. You are one of those people that just other people want to be around you because you're positive and you're up. And, if you're around people who are always sad and down and complaining and whining, oh, it gets tiresome. You don't like to be around people like that. Well, they do. They drag you down. And those people who are full of positiveness, they pull you up. So if you get your own mind straight, lower your own entropy, evolve your own quality of consciousness, you'll be a beacon of light for everyone else. You'll help pull all the people up around you. You don't have to say anything to them. You just have to be. Just be there in their existence, and you will help pull them up. And I assure you that you do not help anybody grow up by lecturing them, by explaining to them why they're wrong and don't really understand and what it is they have to do, to be better. That doesn't help. All they hear when you tell them that, all they hear is that they're not perfect, they're not doing it right. And it just adds to their feelings of inadequacy and despair, and it makes it worse. So you can't lead by lecture. You have to lead by example. You have to be a better person. You have to be love, not act it. Because everybody knows when other people are acting. Most of us don't have a clue when we're acting, but we know when everybody else is acting. So that acting doesn't really help people. Doesn't help yourself or anyone else. First things you need to do is be authentic. Be who you are, and then see how that plays out in the world. Is that good? Does it leave you happy? Does it leave the people around you, positive and happy too? Well, then it's a good thing. If not, then you need to consider how you might change who you authentically are, and not change your actions, but change who you are. Change yourself at the being level. Okay, so this thing about the ability to modify future probability is just innate in all consciousness. And it's I mean, people do it all the time. People will spend, they have a picnic next Sunday, and they don't want it to be rainy, and they'll just spend a lot of time with their thoughts, and it's going to be sunny. It's going to be a nice day. And if they're positive, they will increase that probability of a nice day happening. If they're negative, oh no, I bet it's going to rain. It'll probably rain, and it just won't work out, and it'll be a mess, and then that increases the probability of it being that way. So we collectively now are more powerful than we are individually. So if we have 10 people and they're all equal in their ability to heal, to modify future probability, and there's 10 of them and they're all working together, they will be 10 times more effective than any one of them. It's additive. So if you have one of these things where you get 100,000 people to all think about love and peace, well, that carries some power. But if 99.9% of them, it's just wishful thinking, well, okay, you got 100,000 people, but most of them are really weak in their ability to affect things or change things. So you see, you have to work at two levels. One level, you have to work at the quality of the individual, so that individual has power in his intent. And secondly, you have to have a whole lot of individuals like that, because together they're a lot more powerful. So yes, 50 people or 1,000 people can get together and change the crime statistics, in Miami. That can be done, and that's been demonstrated. Or they can all heal. Those 1,000 people can all get together and heal some little boy who, got burned in a fire real badly. And that will work well too. There are groups of people generally called healing circles, who just get together and heal people because they can. They've gathered enough ability and clarity of mind and purpose to do that. So every Saturday they all get together and spend 2 hours working on a list of ill people, and they get that list. That's people who are ill come to them and say, hey, could you work on me? And if they're really good at it, they don't charge anything. They just do it because they can. If they charge something, they're probably not very good, you see, because they're in it for the wrong reason, and they're not going to be all that powerful. So the people who just will do that, and there's many of those, there's probably hundreds of healing circles, you can Google them, and they just do it because they can. That's why. There's no other reason. It's not a thing for charging and getting ahead. So this is well known. Dennis Menerick, this fellow who was with me going out to Bob's, he would make a parking place for himself when he got to work in the morning, because we had an office building right downtown, and every parking space was full, and you'd get there and you'd have to park a half a mile away. So he would start, before he left, visualizing a car backing out just as he approached that particular spot, because if he approached it 10 seconds later, somebody else already would have pulled into it, because there's hundreds of cars just milling around looking for parking spaces. So you have to have precision in the timing. And he would work on this, and he studied it for a while and said that at about 85%, he could produce a parking space, when he came to work. Occasionally it didn't work. Well, the reason for that is, and here's the last thing that has to do with our probability and ability to affect things, and that is, it depends on how much you have to change the probability. So let's say that there's somebody who is ill, and the probability that they are going to get well and be fine is only 1 in a million, because they've got I don't know, cancer all throughout their body. It's an aggressive cancer. It's been biopsied by 5 different doctors. They all agree that it's this very aggressive, deadly cancer, and they're stage 4, et cetera, et cetera. And you get to that point and you say, well, what's the probability that, within a few weeks they're going to be healthy? Well, it's probably at that point maybe about 100,000 to 1. that they're going to wake up in a few weeks and be healthy. It's not very likely. And a bunch of people can get together and they can make that 100,000 to 1 all the way down to 100 to 1. Wow, 100,000 to 100. They've changed it 3 orders of magnitude. They've lowered it by a factor of 1,000. And it still isn't likely going to work, because even at 100 to 1, it's not likely the person's going to end up healthy in a few weeks. So it depends on how much you're moving the probability. So if you're a very powerful individual, you can move a lot more probability. If you're a very weak individual and you're mainly making wishes rather than having a focused, noiseless intent from the being level, well, you can still change the probability a little, just not very much. And if you get 1,000 people together who are mostly working out of their intellect, well, they can be more effective. But it's still lots less than 1,000 people getting together who are focused, low noise, and working out of their being level, you see? So that's why 1,000 monks will do a lot more than 1,000 people just collected off the street, because, it's still 1,000 people. So I'm giving you all these examples to show that there's a lot of variables in affecting things with your mind. There's a lot of variables with individuals, even variables in yourself from day to day. Some days you are more scattered. Some days you are more preoccupied. Some days you are, more noisy than other days. If you are working on somebody that is very close to you, if you're working on your own child because your child just got hit by a car and you're trying to, to heal them, you probably won't be as effective if you're working on somebody else's child, because your ego and your fear get in the way. In as much as you have ego and fear, that makes you less powerful. So how do you become more powerful? Well, you get rid of the noise. You have good intentions for doing things for the right reasons. You get rid of your fear. And the neat thing about getting rid of fear, if you get rid of all your fear, what's left is love. It's because of the fear that you're not a being of love. All you have to do to be that being of love is to stop being a being of fear. Most of us are up to our eyebrows in fear and ego and beliefs. The fear creates the ego and beliefs. So if we just get rid of it, and it's, if it's fear, it's about us. Fear is always about you. It's your fear. Even if you think it's about somebody else. Oh, I don't let my children go out on Saturday nights because I'm afraid they'll get in with the wrong group, take drugs, and ruin their life. Okay. Well, you might think that's just because I love my children. No, it's because you are fearful that your children will not end up the way you want them to be, the way is best for them, that's good for them. It's about you. Fear is always about you. So when you get rid of that fear and it becomes about other, that's what love is. It's about other. It's not about you. It's what can I give? How can I help? Not what can I get, and how can I keep it? They're just very different things. So that's what happens. You get rid of this fear, you become love. And as you see bigger and bigger pictures, as you just grow up and your picture becomes bigger and you live in a world that is much bigger world than just this physical reality, your world becomes a bigger place. Your decision space, your choices you have are much more than just you would have in this physical reality. You live in a larger space and you have a larger decision space. Then when you grow that way, you also are growing in caring about other people. Because if you don't care about other people and it's all about you, you'll never live in that bigger space. You see, that keeps you out of that space. It keeps you in a little space that's all about you. A tiny little universe, and you're at the center of it. And that's the way your life will be. But as you get rid of the fear, you can find that you have access to all sorts of information, all sorts of knowledge, all sorts of data. And you use that to be helpful to other people. If you use that to impress your friends or to be helpful to yourself, then you'll be very limited in how much you'll grow. That will limit your growth. So in a way, we don't have to worry about, evil wizards, taking over, because the wizardry is self-limiting. If you're evil, you don't get but so much power, even if you spend a lot of time working at it. In the world of negativity, you can be a big fish in a little pond, but in the bigger pond, you'll never be more than a little fish, because negativity is just self-limiting. It's not stable. It doesn't grow but so much before it becomes self-destructive. So that's, I guess, maybe a little good news. You don't have to fear the evil wizard. He's really not all that big a wizard anyway. He's just big in maybe your little pond. But anyhow, I'm just rambling now off on the sidelines. But hopefully, I'm hitting a lot of points that will eventually you'll be able to tie together into a sense of what is it to use your intent to affect others. Okay, now maybe one thing I should define is a collective consciousness. That's a little different. Collective consciousness, what defines a collective consciousness is a group of people who feel like they are united in some sort of cause or for some sort of reason. Maybe it's just a family. You can have a collective consciousness at the family level, where you have this family that feels like a family. They feel like, that they want to be in this family. They're a part of this family. And that can be a collective consciousness at the family level. Those are those families that are kind of very tight. Everybody helps everybody else, that sort of thing. You can have a collective consciousness at a business level. All the people that work at IBM, kind of have a collective IBM consciousness. They see the world in a similar way. Not maybe the first day they get there, but after they've worked there for 5 or 10 years, they begin to look at the world in the way that the people around them look at the world. They begin to dress like the people around them. They begin to speak like the people around them. They begin to take on the characteristics of being an IBMer, or being at a particular business or a particular campus or a particular university or whatever. There's a collective consciousness around that. There's a collective consciousness around being a member of the group called humanity. We as humans have some collective consciousness. Now, Carl Jung called these things archetypes. There were archetypes at the human level, archetypes at the national level, archetypes at the, I guess the business level or whatever. But these archetypes that Jung talked about are essentially just a collective consciousness. So the collective consciousness is just a vector sum of all the consciousness of the individuals that are in the group. And how do you get into the group? You identify yourself as part of the group. That's how. You don't have to, join. You don't have to, get a little card you carry. If you just identify as being part of that group, you are a part of that group, and you begin to get information from that group that is representative of that group, and you begin to take on attributes of the group, and they begin to take on attributes of you. But you're small and they're big. So how you affect them is negligible. How they affect you can be a lot larger, you see. So that's the way it is with a group consciousness. National levels, we call that, nationalism, right? That's kind of the group consciousness of I am, a Greek or an American or an Englishman or whatever. And there's a certain amount of attitude that comes with that, a certain amount of personality, a certain amount of the way you see the world that comes with that. So if you are, well, we'll take an American as an example. If you're an American, then if you really identify strongly as an American, then you will get more of that American attitude will become yours because you identify strongly. But if you don't identify strongly as an American, oh, okay, yeah, I was born here, but I don't really feel like I belong here. I just born here and I'm an American by birth, but I don't really relate to it a whole lot, then you don't take on much from that whole. That whole thing of being American doesn't really affect you much. You kind of stepped outside of it. So the key thing about being part of a collective consciousness is you have to see yourself as a member or as belonging. The more you see yourself as a member, the more you're affected by it. The more you see yourself as, yeah, I work for IBM. I'm part of Big Blue and we make the best, computer parts. And if you kind of have that feeling and you're really an IBM guy and you love it, being an IBM guy, then you will become the kind of the epitome of the IBM stereotype. You will gain, you will get a lot out of the IBM collective consciousness. Whereas if you're on the periphery of IBM and you say, yeah, I work here, but yeah, I don't buy into this stuff. I just work here. It's just where I make my money, but I don't really feel like I'm a part of this group. I feel like really I'm an outsider here and so on. Then you don't get much of that. And you don't really belong to that collective consciousness, even though you work there. So you belong to whatever collective consciousness that you associate yourself with. The more strongly you associate it, the more strongly you affect it, and it affects you. And the way that works is that all consciousness is netted. All consciousness, just like the World Wide Web, where all the websites are netted. There's 1 billion websites out there, and they're all on the net, and anybody can access any one of them. But we only access the stuff that we connect with, so we like. So consciousness is sort of like that. We're all netted. So when you have an intention that you're part of this group, then you're open to the communications from that group, and you take them on and absorb them. If you're on the sideline and say, no, I just work here, I'm not a part of that group, then you close off from the intentions of that group, you see? So it's a matter of your consciousness kind of plugging in or plugging out, of whatever group that you in your own mind connect to. So if you connect to being a white supremacist, or you connect to being, whatever, an abolitionist, I guess back in the 1600s, or you whatever group you connect to, you don't have to be a card-carrying member. You don't have to pay dues. You don't have to work there. All you have to do is identify yourself with them, and you start sharing their thoughts, start sharing their attitudes. That's why you can have a consciousness, a collective consciousness in a family. You start sharing each other's attitudes. You care about each other, and you share thoughts. And the family has its own kind of attitude, its own kind of way of being, seeing the world. So that's what collective consciousness is. There are thousands of different subsets of collective consciousness, around thousands of ways people identify themselves with, with other things, with groups, with ideas, with concepts. That's what makes concepts so powerful. If you have a concept and your concept, gets millions of people to identify with something, that forms up a collective consciousness right there, and maybe there was not one before, now there is one, and it exists. And they start sharing their thoughts, their minds, their attitudes, their feelings start going back and forth between them. We see the same thing on the negative side, and we call it a mob. A mob is just a collective consciousness of a bunch of angry people. You have a bunch of angry and fearful people, and they become a mob, and that mob will do things that none of the individuals would ever do. But together, that mob can do things more horrible than any one of them would do. And that's because their collective consciousness, they're connected now. Their consciousness are connected. They're getting the information from each other. So the anger, one guy's anger feeds everybody else, gets that anger. And they get more angry, which makes everybody else more angry. And as they get more angry, everybody else gets more angry, you see, and it builds to where they make a monster out of this mob. And the anger is just building because it's what do they call in electronics, that's a positive feedback. the more you get, the more you get. And the more you get, the more you get. And it just keeps building on itself until it gets saturated and can't grow anymore. And that's when the mob gets crazy. And so that's collective consciousness. It can be a mob, but it also can be a very grown up, high quality, low entropy, loving individual. And it works the same way, you see, as the mob does, but it does the opposite way. Suddenly, people who are around that person and kind of identify with that, with him, and say who he is and what he's doing. Maybe he's the guru, and maybe the other ones are his his followers or something. Then just by being around him, it pulls them up. They connect with him. They get some of his attitude, flows to them. They feel better, and they become more positive. You see, so it's the mob in reverse. It's good things can work the same way. So what we need to do collectively as a people is try to produce a situation where we get more and more thoughtful people, low entropy people who are thinking positive thoughts. And that will cause more people who are, say, on the fence, positive or negative, about half, 50-50. It will cause them to bump over to be more positive, which will cause other people to become more positive, you see? So if we could just get that going, that snowballs as well. But what we got going is this negative thing. Life sucks, it's all horrible, everybody's cheating, everybody's lying, and so on. And when you have that, well, that just builds more on that. And the more everybody feels down, then the more down everybody feels. And that also can descend in a downward spiral. So yes, it boils down to, just like in all the literature and all the plays and the books, it's kind of the good versus evil, right? You have one side that's kind of trying to work an upward spiral where people feel better and more positive and are kinder and gentler, and another where it's pulling the other way. Everything's starting to go in a downward spiral. So the challenge that I give to I guess everybody listening and everybody in general is try your best to be part of the solution and not part of the problem, because both of those are working. And if you can make your own life part of the solution as opposed to part of the problem, get positive, get out of the negativity, let go of the fear, then eventually we'll get to that critical mass of positiveness that'll just kind of ratchet everything up. So, all right, I've been talking for a long time. I just been running on and running on here.
I told you at the beginning, I'm going to sit here and listen. It's amazing. You touched on so many points, and it's amazing because you kind of show both scenarios, so you can get a very firm grasp on what you're sharing, and it makes common sense. And there's a lot of that I want to touch on, but the first thing I guess I'll go into is like this shift of what can I give, what can I get, when I'm trying to think about like the difference between an enlightened person, or some people use the word woke or awake. Well, there are two things for sure. One of them, they take responsibility for their environment, their actions, the things that happen to them, because if you're a victim and everything's happening to you, it's really hard to be empowered to influence the probability of your life and what you'd like to create. You're disempowered. You don't feel like you can create anything or do what you want. And the second thing is like, what can I give? How can I help? It's like, it's so simple, but it will change your entire life. It's same, but different. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, yeah, there's stuff that's negative and challenging, but you know what I mean? On this giving spectrum, you're going to experience your life in the universe in reality in an entirely different way. It's such a fundamental shift. It's night and day. It's positive, negative.
Sure.
You shared too about, the weak force and strong force. Not exactly like that, but building the momentum. And I remember reading a book by Yogananda called Scientific Affirmations. And it was really great. And I use this actually when I go to festivals and Burning Man or teach or something. It's like what he puts in the book is like, okay, you say an affirmation like, I would like this thing. I would like a car, or I would like a job that I enjoy, or I would like a great partner, and you define the thing that you want. He's like, but you don't put any will into it. The universe requires a will. And so if we're in an electromagnetic universe, which you may or may not think, I don't know, you can tell me after, but we're creating, Dr. Joe said something along the lines is like your thoughts are the electrical signal to the universe, and your feelings are the magnetic charge. And so if you have this like will, like I want to do this thing, X, doesn't matter, and you just say it, it's like boop, like 0.01 on the spectrum of like, influencing the force that you're in.
Mm-hmm.
But if you like imagine a mother whose car got turned over and her child is under that car, and she is not going to think about how heavy the car is. She's going to walk over there and just lift that thing with every single ounce of, every part of her being is going to be moving that thing with what she can. She's not going to think about how heavy the car is, how much she can squat or deadlift. She's going to put everything that she is to move the car off of her kid. And so if you could take that idea of willpower into your intention, because what it's suggesting in the book is you're just saying the words, and there's no feeling, there's no being, there's no energy. But if you take that idea and you put that every ounce of your being into that thing that you're trying to create, you're going to have a much different result. And it kind of ties back into the being. Why do you want that thing? You're not going to be able to generate that force for some sort. I need another $1 million so I can buy more crap and get more material stuff so I feel good on the inside. It's like, no. If anything, you might want to go like have an activity with your friends. That's what you could use money for. Be around people who are loving and have a great experience with people you care about. That's a little bit more aligned, but I don't want to digress too much. But there's a lot of other things that you touched on, but what I wanted to kind of ask, so the egregor thing I wanted to touch on, because you ever heard about the word egregor? Basically, like it's your cultural paradigm, or like the spirit of an entity. So the oil companies of the world, it's like the spirit of it, right? If you go to a Catholic church, it's like principles that to define that culture is influencing you. So IBM creates this cultural influence. Or if you have like a clothing company like Patagonia, where they're going to go out of business, but they define their company culture of like, we're going to do what's right in business. It's like the spirit of their business. It's this energy, and it affects everything. And churches do that. Institutions do that. Schools do that. Nations do that. As you said, it's like this, what it means to be Canadian. I like maple syrup and hockey. If you're American, it's a few different things. If you're Australian, whatever, you have this different like identity. And so if we could use that same concept and define principles that are loving and that are caring and that are supportive and that are cooperative, and we start to identify with that, and put that intention. And that's a little bit of what's going to be happening at the Mayan Heart Festival is I think Maya and some of the Native Americans are going to do a declaration for world peace and sovereignty. Like a declaration is like they have a specific prayer that's going to be said out loud. Then there's going to be a global synchronized meditation. And I think that if we can add this will, I'm curious what your thoughts would be on what do you feel is the fastest route or an efficient route, or even just a general direction towards world peace in a real way, like in a real sense. Because I think when you're talking about the positive negative swing, we're just on the negative swing, and people in that fear loop, right? They're not like aware of all of this stuff. They're fearful. They're in that game, and they can't get to this other side yet, right? Because they're in that loop. So we need more and more to be in a little bit loving, a little bit caring, and just to be that way to pull them over. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on if you have ever thought about like what the fastest route would be towards world peace. Because I think that this idea of these global synchronized meditations are defining a world culture, defining a personal culture, being that wherever you are. Because right now we're the crazy people, essentially. You meditate and you think about others, and you don't do things just for money. It's just like you try to help. Like for somehow we're the weird ones at this point in time, which is terrible. And we're just trying to spread the message of kindness, of collaboration. I like to do the hashtag Team Earth, and it's just Team Earth, like, let's cooperate, don't murder anybody, even if they think something different, just tolerate them at least. So anyway, I'm rambling, but, I'm just curious if you ever thought about a fast track or what we could do to create world peace in a real and meaningful way.
Yeah, I do have my own thoughts about how that most likely would work out. But I'll start by saying everything adds, everything helps. So everything that's positive is part of the solution. Everything that's positive helps. So let's say that you have a world peace thing, and on next Wednesday or something, everybody's going to pray for peace, or good vibes or whatever. We're going to do some positive stuff, and we do that in a big way. We get a lot of people interested, so we reach out and we connect to lots and lots of people and say, okay, we need some more positive thoughts in this world, so we're going to take a little time just to be positive. Well, probably the great majority of those people will only interact through their intellect. They'll say, okay, I see that. Yeah, peace is something we need. And so, yeah, sure, I'll go along with that. I'll be part of the peace crowd. And, at that time, on that day, I'll take my 15 minutes or my hour to participate and do whatever. And, I'll do that. But they don't really expect anything particular to happen. They just are going to do it because it feels good to do it. They want to be a part of something that's positive. They don't like all the negative stuff. But so you look at that and you might say, well, that's a very weak thing for them individually. They're going to go do it. And then when it's done, they'll go ahead and live their life just the way they were living it before, and nothing will be different. It's not going to change them. It's not going to affect them, but it does affect them a little bit. It does wake them up. It does let them see that being positive is an important thing. It lets them exercise that positiveness, even if it's just for, a half an hour, one day. So even though things like that seem trivial and they're not really changing much, that's not true. They are helpful. Everything that's positive adds. And because that one person somewhere in the world decided to spend a half an hour being positive, that gives them just one little further step up on this growth path of becoming positive. You start to learn to swim generally not by leaping into deep water, but by getting your toes wet first and then standing, ankle deep and whatever. People will gradually change. They're not going to dramatically change. So we at the point where we're trying to make change, we have to realize that people are who they are. And if we even change just a little bit of their attitude, that's good. Even if it doesn't do anything marvelous that day, it's good. And it's part of the positive process. So everything helps. Everything that people do in this way is part of the solution. It's helpful. Now, the way I think that it will probably work out, and it's just because of the, where I come from. I'm a physicist, and, I have my own way of looking at the world that is changed by that. When you're a physicist, you see the world a little differently than people who are poets. It's just the nature of the beast. So I have my own ways of looking at the world. And what I see is that these good intentions, these understandings, the fact that love is the answer and that caring about others is really the key, these people have been around forever. The Buddha walked around 2,400 years ago and said that this reality was, an illusion. Okay, so here I am 2,400 years later saying it's a virtual reality. Well, what's the difference? You see, it's a very similar thing. And he was saying that love, we're growing. It's about individual growth and getting rid of fear. And he did all that stuff. And we've had people and movements, sometimes religions, sometimes not, sometimes other groups that have been interested in positive, loving, caring things and knowing in their hearts and minds that this is the way forward for not only themselves, but for humanity. The problem is it's always existed in the margins. It has always existed. It's always been there. We've never been without people who had positive attitudes and understood that, love is the answer. There's always been those people around, but they've been in the margins. They haven't been mainstream. Okay, now in our culture, and I'll just kind of say Western culture in general, because even in the East, Western culture is dominant. Unless you go into a temple someplace, then Western culture is not dominant, but basically the commerce, the business, the education, the rat race, the big discrepancies in incomes, and the greed and the need for more money and more stuff and more things. That's not just Western. That's everywhere now. That's a kind of a world culture. And in this culture, there are those people who have the most influence over what the people in this culture believe, what they think, what they find credible. And in the old days, those people were called the high priests. They were the religious guys. They were the popes and the whatever, the people who were heads of religions. They were the ones that told everybody else what was true and what was false. They were kind of the arbiters of what everybody else believed. If they said this is the way it was, this is how reality works, and this is what you need to believe, the masses tended to believe that. They gave their high priests credibility for knowing more about what the world was about than they did. So things haven't changed much. We still have high priests, except today they're scientists, not priests, but they still serve the same function. It is the scientists who tell most everybody else. Now I'm talking about mainstream, not the people out in the margins who already have a bigger picture and have a bigger answer, but the people in the mainstream. The high priests of science tell people what to believe. This is true, that's not true. This is a fact, that's not a fact. That's, good science, that's bad science. So when the high priests of science declare something to be true and valid, then people tend to believe, okay, that's a fact. That's true. That's the way things are. Scientists don't lie to us. They just tell us what the facts are. You can trust the scientists to tell you the facts and to separate the facts from the opinion. That's their job. High priests of religion 500 years ago had the same job, sorting out, facts from opinions. And that was the same job. So we have the high priests of science now that are the leaders of what's true and what's not in our culture. And until these high priests actually say something that legitimizes a kinder, gentler world, that legitimizes a positive viewpoint, that legitimizes a different, bigger picture viewpoint, until they go there, the mainstream isn't going to believe it. It's always going to exist in the margins, and the people in the margins, what's that? The people in the margins, 10%, 5%, 20%, I don't know, but not enough to actually change the nature of the world that we live in. So if we're going to change the mainstream thought, then it's going to have to be through the high priests of science to do that. Because I think we can stay out on the margins, and we can have, peace day and peace week, and we can demonstrate, and we can explain to each other, how love is the answer, and we can do that. And there will be thousands and thousands of people who will agree with us. And there'll be a lot of others who will kind of nod and say, yeah, that sounds good. And after they nod and say, yeah, that sounds good, they go right back to living their lives the way they do. They won't really change themselves, because you haven't gotten inside of their kind of credibility barrier, if you will. You haven't affected their life in some way. So that's our problem. We have lots of people that show up and nod their head and say, yes, I understand. I get it. Love is the answer. And 3 weeks later, nothing's changed in their life. They're just the same as they were. They're in the same job, with the same relationships, with the same fears and the same ego and the same beliefs that they had before. So that's what I mean by mainstream. To get into mainstream, you really have to have a mass changing of people's reality, of people's understanding. You have to go from a little picture to the bigger picture. And though we've always had big pictures in the margins, we haven't yet had big pictures, in the mainstream, at least not that lasted very long. So I think the way forward, and again, I'm very biased this way because of who I am and where I come from. So and I offer that, freely. This is just Tom Campbell's viewpoint. It's a grain of salt or whatever. You don't have to take it too seriously. But what I see is that we are coming upon the time when, and I'd say a critical time, but we're coming to the time when this massive change in the mainstream can take place. Up until now, it just didn't have the infrastructure to support it. Up until now, all those little bubbles of enlightenment out there in the margins were all local, and it's all it all turns out to be a local thing. Well, it spreads around. Sure, Buddhism's everywhere now. Buddhism's probably spread more than any religion in the last 50 years. And the Buddhists have a real caring, loving philosophy. But again, most Buddhists, just like most Christians, go listen, say, yeah, nod their heads, give a little money, and then go back to their lives and are just the way they were, before. It's just the way people are. So anyway, I think that in the near future, we are going to see, or we have the potential to see, some dramatic change. The reason that it always stayed in the margins was partially because it was local and we didn't have that kind of communications. Now we've got a global communications grid. Anything that happens anywhere of import, everybody knows about it. Well, that wasn't true when Buddha was walking around. There weren't any reporters running around saying, Buddha, tell me about your time under the banyan tree, really, what happened there? And, and the Buddha gives a talk and, 7.5 billion people, see it on their, on their YouTube channel, the next day. Well, we didn't have that sort of thing. Everything was local and things stayed small and margins stayed in the margins. But now we have the communications infrastructure that things could change in a massive way rather quickly. Never had that in the world before. Okay, first time since humans climbed out of the trees that we've been in this situation. All right, now also, we have science presently, physics particularly, working toward an understanding that materialism is not the answer. This is not a materialist world. And they call that, well, some of it is said to be that our reality isn't a material reality. It's not about mass and charge and space. It's about information. It's an information-based world. Okay, and the reason they say that is because that's what their experiments are telling them. Their experiments don't act like it's a materialist world, and that started 100 years ago with the double slit experiment, and it's just been getting worse as the time goes on. They have more and more and more experiments that say this cannot be a material world because materialism can't get the right answer here. So that's growing. And when these two forces meet, I think we have chance for motion in the mainstream, and that is, physicists are saying that we have an information-based reality based on their experiments. Physicists don't like that idea. They don't know where to go next, and they don't know what to say after they say that. They're kind of stuck there because they don't really know what that means. But what it means is that this reality is computed. Okay, and they will agree with that far, that it's a computed reality. But where they don't want to go is, where is it computed? how's it computed? Why is it computed? Okay. Now, when you understand consciousness, you know the answers to all those questions, you see. But physics isn't going to go there because that frightens them. But they are going to get to the point someday, and I think someday over the next couple of decades, where they say, this is not a material reality. It's not about mass and force and time and space. It's about information. And when they say, yea, verily, this is a virtual reality, it's not going to be lost on everybody else, all the non-physicists, that there's this question hanging. The elephant in the room says, oh, where's the computer? Who's the programmer if this is a virtual reality? And why is it being programmed? That will kind of let the cat out of the bag, what is it, open the box of troubles, or, the can of worms, whatever you want to say it. That's going to raise a ruckus, because that means that we are not physical beings. We are information. We're consciousness. You see, that these bodies are avatars. And when we get to that point, then who is the computer? Well, I expect about then there's going to be this big fight among all the standing religions about, my God's a better computer than your God, or a better programmer than your God. And that will be the religion's time to jump into that vacuum and take power. But I'm hoping there'll be enough people who won't buy that, who will say, nah, that's just more of the same. We need new ideas here, and they're going to realize what reality is all about. That consciousness, consciousness is the thing that's fundamental. And that's why I have these 5 experiments that are going to do quantum mechanics experiments that are going to demonstrate that this is a virtual reality, that it's information based, and that it has to be generated by a conscious will, by a conscious entity. You see, and these experiments will lend a lot of evidence to that, to those conclusions. So I think when that happens, if there's enough people who understand the bigger picture, that consciousness is the computer, and that we are consciousness playing avatars in a virtual reality for the purpose of making choices that help us grow up toward love, getting rid of our fear, and that the natural evolutionary path of consciousness is to lower entropy. And what that means in an information system, and again, I'm skipping a whole bunch of logical steps, but this is logic, guys. It really is science. It means becoming love. So it very logically comes to the point that our purpose here is to become love. And it's not that that sounds really cool, but that is a logical necessity of this process. The same process that's now calculating better physics says that we're here to become love. And that's not an assumption. That is that's logically derived, that is the answer. That is the only reason that we are here, and that this here even exists. So when people get that kind of a message, if there's enough of us, if we can get to that critical mass where that idea seems viable, well, this planet is full of people looking for a better way. It's full of people who know that what we're doing now isn't working. It's not good. It's not best for everybody. It's not functional. It's a very dysfunctional way to carry on business, and people know that. They just don't know what else to do, what to do about it. It just is the way it is, so they keep on keeping on because there doesn't seem to be anything else. But once they understand a bigger picture, I think if we have that critical mass, we could, over just several decades, see a massive change in the mainstream, because we have the communications, toward a kinder, gentler world, toward an understanding that we are here to become love, and that this is not just a wishful thinking kind of religious thing, but it is science. It's a logically derived from first principles science that does better physics and does better metaphysics and explains why the paranormal is normal, and does better epistemology and ontology and cosmology, all those things, suddenly all the paradoxes fall out and make sense. They're not paradoxes anymore. So if we kind of get to that point, then I think we'll see a massive change. But I think it has to happen in the mainstream. Otherwise, we'll go on for another millennia with peace and light, goodness and love, bubbles of enlightenment here and there, and it'll be a very, very slow process for those bubbles to get a little bigger and a little bigger and a little bigger before they get a mass. And to avoid this bubble of enlightenment fighting that bubble of enlightenment, like we ended up seeing with religious wars and that sorts of things. You know, yes, we all seem to be working for the same thing, but we're doing it right and you're doing it wrong, therefore we need to kill you, you know. That kind of thinking isn't really progress. So that's kind of what we've had on the sidelines. The various bubbles of enlightenment have had the misfortune of getting enough people, enough adherents, that the quality of the message gets diluted to the point that they get full of, you know, we're better, we're right, people disagree with us, are wrong. And that's a very low quality of consciousness attitude. But when organizations get big, they also get more average in their attitudes and in their qualities. So that's kind of the problem we've had. Religions and so on, they start good. It's all about love. It's all about caring. It's all about turning the other cheek and helping your brother in the big picture. And it's wonderful. And then as long as that's 10 and 20 and 30, 50 or 100 people, that's great. But once it becomes, you know, 150,000 people and 200,000 people and millions of people, the whole thing degenerates into something that's now not so great anymore. It becomes dogmatic. It becomes ritualistic. It becomes repeat after me, do as I say, and it loses its original spark of love, because it's spread faster and wider than the people had the quality to support. So I think maybe now we have this choice, this ability, we have the infrastructure, we have the ideas, we have the concepts, and we have the high priests getting to the point where they're getting ready to say that this is indeed a virtual reality, which tells us that there is something else at a more fundamental level than ourselves. Because the source of the virtual reality has to be a more fundamental thing than the virtual reality, you see. So that has science telling us that there is something that is non-physical to us, because our virtual reality, this physical reality, is virtual. There's something that's outside this virtual reality that is more fundamental than we are, and we're a subset of it. That's almost religious. You know, that almost sounds like, you know, you hear that, you know, in a church someplace. So when science then closes that gap between materialism and spirituality, and between physics and metaphysics, then I think we have a chance for the mainstream to move forward into a better paradigm. Now, will that happen? I have no idea. I just say that it's possible now, because we have the communications and we have the high priests that are nearing getting to this point of pointing out this idea that there's something non-physical that is more fundamental than we are. Now, they would never say that, but everybody else is not that dumb. They will immediately get that point as soon as they say this is a virtual reality. The physicists aren't going to say that. Don't ask them to lead this parade, but they're going to kick it off. They're going to get the ball rolling. It's going to be everybody else who says, well, you know, where is it being computed and why and by whom, for what reason? And if we have a good model that makes sense to people, then I think we're maybe have a road out, a path forward in the mainstream, out of the, you know, so now we're talking about billions of people changing their attitudes toward who and what they are and why they're here, all in the same week because of the internet, you see? That's a huge shift in thought from negative to perhaps hopeful to perhaps even positive. That will have a huge effect. So anyway, that's my happy vision, that within the next I don't know, 2 or 3 decades, we might actually see a breakthrough in the mainstream toward a more positive attitude toward existence, toward reality, toward being. And it's just logical steps thereafter that it's about becoming love. It's not a, it's not, that doesn't take a leap. Right now, to go from where we are in materialism to becoming love takes this huge leap of faith. And it's, it's a hard leap for most people to take. But then it won't be a leap of faith. It'll be logical science. It'll be, yes, here are all the steps. So I think that's the thing. And that's just through my eyes, from my perspective. And I see it as a possibility. I don't see it as a, well, in the short term, I don't see it as necessarily having to happen. But in the long term, it will happen. In the long term, we will get there, because we are here to evolve consciousness. As our consciousness evolves, it will become love. That's what it's about. Evolution may be slow, but evolution is tenacious and just keeps on chugging. So, it may be another, million years, who knows? But we will get there, because that's the nature of the reality that we're in, that we will do that. And when we do, humanity will form something bigger than itself. It'll be something, we will create a thing that is much bigger and more powerful and more capable than any of the individuals in it. That's just the nature of organization and entropy reduction. So we will get there. But whether that's, like I say, millennia, or whether that's decades, it's hard to say. But for the first time in the human race's history, we have all the tools in place to do it. And we've never have had before. We've never had the ability to actually pull this off in a big way. It just wouldn't work. But we're getting there. So who knows, a decade, 2 decades, we could actually see this ball start to roll. And if it does start to roll, it may be another 3 or 4 decades that the rolling, takes place and starts to, flesh out and become something. So it's not going to be something that happens quickly. But I'm thinking within a couple of decades, this ball might just start off rolling down that hill, and it'll continue to gain momentum. So see, I'm a very positive, optimistic sort of guy. I see good news ahead, perhaps in the short term, but certainly in the long term, because that, once you understand our reality and the nature of consciousness, that is where we're evolving to. And we will get there sooner or later. Even if we go backwards first, we will eventually get there. But I'm all in favor of getting there sooner instead of later. I'd like a kinder, happier, more congenial world where everybody feels like what they really want to do is contribute, be helpful, be caring. Not because they're trying to look good, but because that's what they want to do. And in a society like that, the people who are very negative toward collectivism, and there's a lot of people who say, oh yeah, you get a collective going where it's about all the people and not about individuals. And then you have a tyranny of the majority, and it just goes to hell in a handbasket, and you end up with a dictatorship of the people in charge. Well, that is true. That is what happens in a fearful world. If you have a bunch of fearful people, that's where a collective ends up, because eventually, like in the book, some, what was it? Some, who was in charge? The pigs, I think, were in charge in Animal Farm.
Yeah.
Some pigs are more equal than other pigs, So you're always going to have that as long as the people there have a low quality of consciousness. So if your population is fear-based, collectives will always degenerate into some kind of a I don't know, what do we call it? Some kind of a fascist, thing. That's just the way they go if it's full of fearful people. And the only way to get a collective that's not full of fearful people is to keep it small. oh, me and my, 20 friends can do this, and we can have a happy collective that's not fearful, and we can do all kinds of things that are loving, and it will persist as long as me and my friends are just there and nobody else comes in. But as soon as it's a mass thing in the mainstream, then collectives tend to degenerate to the lowest common denominator of the quality of the people that make them up. That's just the way it is. But in a world where you don't have a fear-based culture, where you don't have people that are full of fear, where you have people who are full of love and caring, it doesn't work that way. Then the collective maximizes individual freedom. It maximizes opportunity. It maximizes everybody being what they want to be and what they have talents to be. Because everybody wants everybody else to be happy, to have what they want, to grow in their own way. So if you say, oh, I don't like doing what I'm doing, well, the system will try. Everybody there will want to fix that for you because they want to help. They're asking, how can I help? What can I do? You see, not how can I abuse you? What can I get out of you? What is it? What's in it for me? They're about how can I help make this better? So if everybody in your organization wants to help everybody else be as much as they can be, you've optimized your freedom. You've optimized your personal choice, not ended up in some kind of dictatorship some places. You get just the opposite of that. But first we got to grow up, you see, and growing up starts with one person at a time. But hopefully we can produce this environment in the mainstream that helps a whole lot of people grow up together, because people are hungry to grow up. People are hungry to be in a caring, nice, supportive environment. I mean, hungry isn't even the word. They're starving for it. We feel that need. We feel that it's not right. We feel that what we're doing is wrong, that our political systems are wrong, our economic systems are wrong. The way we sort out the haves from the have-nots is wrong. It's just wrong. And it doesn't take, a college degree to come to that conclusion, that it's just broken. We need to do something else. So I think if we offer something else, that's not oh yeah, join my religion. I just want 10% of your money, and after that you can do whatever you want. We don't, if we offer them something real, something logical, something that makes sense, something that doesn't have a leader, hopefully, something diverse, something without hierarchy, an understanding, then we will have a chance to turn this corner. So I think it's great. I think we're in very exciting times. I think we're close to some big stuff happening. And I think everybody, including those that are in charge of this movement that's trying to shed some more light and more peace and more happiness in the world, they're all part of the solution. That's what we need, because that's partly what's making people aware that this is what we need more of. This is what's missing in our life. It's not about the stuff. It's about the caring. It's about the love. It's about the relationship. So I think we're in a point that is a very exciting time to be here. And as much as many of the people who are alive today may see actually a big change in this world toward a kinder, gentler place, it's possible. So happy news. It's possible.
Oh man.
And the more we have shows like this, the more you and I talk, and the more you help, the people. Where are they in Guatemala, you say?
Oh, the festival will be in Guatemala.
Yeah. The more of those festivals we have, and the wider reach that they have, and just the more positiveness that you can get into the world, then that will help this transition work. Because otherwise, if we get to the point that people get to the virtual reality, and the various religions and other groups want to grab the power, about their religion is where the programmers all live, and their God's a better programmer than the other gods. And if we get into that kind of a strife, because it'll be a vacuum. Once materialism is gone at the center, there's going to be this huge vacuum, this whole power vacuum of, all right, who's in charge of telling us what to believe now? You don't mean we're going to have to figure this out on our own, and actually be authentic people who know what we believe. Somebody's going to tell us what to believe, and there'll be this big vacuum for that. And of course, those people who would like power and control, all of the old things that we hopefully are going to get rid of, they will step right up to the front and try to sell themselves as the answer to that power vacuum. But if there's enough of us who've had enough of that and who see a bigger picture, then we won't fall for it again. We'll go another way. And with the worldwide communications we got now, with the internet, with these festivals going on, with people seeing, and feeling what's wrong and what's right, I think we have a chance of having enough critical mass that we'll make a hard right turn into the positive world in the next 20, 30 years. So that's how I see it coming. And I find it, I find all these other things, the festivals and just people having meetings and talking about it and books and, everything. I find all of that as a necessary prelude. It's like setting the stage. It's getting people ready. It's giving people alternatives. And we need that. And we need to keep doing that, because eventually we're going to have choices, big choices that are going to make a lot of difference, whether we go forward a great leap or backward in a great leap. And hopefully there'll be enough people by that time that are ready to make choices wisely. So that's why you're here. That's why you have a podcast, because you're trying to spread these ideas out, to more and more people. That's why I'm here talking for as long as it works, because the more people who understand big pictures, the more likely we're going to end up with a kinder, gentler place sooner rather than later. So, and there's thousands of people like you and I, all out doing their own thing to try to do this. And every one of them is valuable. Every one of them is part of the solution. So we just have to keep going and doing what we can do. And hopefully when we get there, it'll all work out. And if it doesn't, well, then we get to start over and try again. And we will make it one day.
Oh my God. It's so good. I 100% agree with all of that. And my brain is like the mandala behind me trying to like process all of this. But thinking of it from a virtual reality perspective or a simulation, first thing is you're the player, you're the main character. So
Right.
yes, we want to change the world. And you can define, so you go into like that programming, the core programming is your beliefs. You got to get to like, I don't know what it is, and IT guys or programmers could tell me, but like your beliefs, am I going to serve others? Am I going to take responsibility? Define the reality that I want. Okay. Look at my programming. I'm going to start to define the reality I want. I want to be around good people. I want to enjoy my life. I want to see the good in others. I want to help, and define it. Right? In a fear base, you don't have that time to do that internal programming, because you're afraid you're going to get money. You're in the mind and you're in the intellect. You can't get into the feeling and into the cooperation and into the harmony of the environment. So when you start to look at your own coding, define the reality that you want, you can live in that world tomorrow, today, now. Just be it. So you got to define it, then you start being it, and then you get a little bit of a feedback loop, so things will start to change, but you can do that individually. And what you and I are expressing is, how do we do that collectively? Because when you're on this side, we want to help as many people as we can. Like basically when I go to Burning Man or festivals or meet anyone, I'm just like, hey man, how are you? Lady, whatever. It's like, are you happy? No, life is terrible. And I hate everything. I'm like, oh, that sucks. Like I have compassion for you. I don't want that. Like my life isn't perfect. I'm not joyous always. I'm doing pretty good, but I'd like to improve it, but I'm doing better than most of the feedback I'm getting for others. And I'm like, well, you know that you can influence your reality. And as maybe you would put it, you can influence the probabilities of what feedback you're getting in your environment, what people you want to be around, what do you want to do for your livelihood, all this kind of thing. And man, you touched on so much, but I wanted to say, fascinatingly enough, when I was studying with the Native American elder, I was like, what's your view on God? And he goes, God, programmer. And he always says programmer, which I think is very fascinating. And he said to me before, and he said on the podcast, he's like, you have two spirit guides, a positive and a negative, not to be mistaken with a good or bad, because the body is the ground in the simulation you're in. And I was like, what? Oh, crap. I was like, I talked to this guy, Tom, before, and he's like, you guys are going to like each other. And so, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's good. It's a good set of metaphors and way to put it. But you make a good point. It's not that we're all going to be miserable until we're all happy. It's not like that. You can be happy right now in this world with all its greed and all its vices and all the things that don't work well. You can still be happy here. Step number one is to realize that you have choices and you have to take responsibility for the choices you make. And if you're unhappy, it's because you choose. You're making the wrong choices. You're letting your fear and your ego and your beliefs make your choices. And if you let them make your choices, you will be unhappy. That's how you get to be unhappy. Not only will you be unhappy, you'll also be in pain and you'll be miserable and you'll be, you'll never be satisfied. You'll always be like you're trying to claw your way to the top and you never quite get there. And if you do get there, you find out the top's not such a big deal anyway. You're still unhappy. You're a millionaire and you're still miserable and you still can't have a good relationship and, it doesn't work. So you can be happy here now. You just have to let go of the fear and stop blaming others. Stop blaming the society. Stop blaming the institutions and the economic system and the corporations and the government. Stop blaming everybody else for your unhappiness and your misery. You're unhappy because you choose to be unhappy. You don't intellectually choose to be happy, but you make those choices based on your ego and fear that make you unhappy. So you can be a very happy camper in this world because you don't take it personally. You see, it's not about you. When you're no longer at the center of the universe in your own mind, it's not about you. So if somebody's rude to you and steps on your foot or calls you a name or says that you're a fool or incompetent, there's no problem. That's their opinion. It's their problem, not your problem. You see, you don't take it on as a personal insult and get upset and angry and fuss back because it's really not about you. It's about them and the choices that they're making, you see. So become an authentic person, get rid of your fear, and you can live right here, right now, in the society and in the, within this world that we've got, and be a happy person. Find joy, find peace, have great relationships. It's all available now. And the only thing standing in the way is your own fear. And it's not because somebody else is to blame for it. It's your own fear, and the only person that can change your fear is you. So that's an important thing. Yeah, it's not like, well, we're going to all be miserable until we all find, peace in some miraculous way. No, if we're all miserable, we won't find that peace. If we're all miserable and unhappy, we will follow those hustlers that will try to jump in and fill that vacuum that materialism leaves. That's what we'll do, because we'll be looking for some strong man that's on our side that'll take care of us, and that's the one we'll jump in with. And we won't do it right. We'll make poor decisions when we get there. So if you want to be happy, if you want to find great relationships with people, have a great love relationships, then you need to get rid of your fear. And people ask then, well, how do I get rid of my fear? What fear? Anytime you feel negative, anytime you feel unhappy, anytime you feel anxiety, anger, annoyance, anything like that that's negative, that's your fear. It's your ego in response to your fear. Trace it back, find out what it is, own it, accept it, be authentic, and then change yourself. Get rid of it. And you can change yourself just by having a strong intent to do so, because that intent will change your future probability of who you are as well. So there it is.
Yep.
So we can be happy now. We don't have to wait for decades. It's just it's ourselves that make us so miserable. We blame it on others, but it's not the others. It's our choices.
Yeah, I agree. I agree 100%. And the one thing that I wanted to add on to before, when you're talking about the high priests, this is where it goes into like, the religious, or the idea of like it's afterlife. You made a really good point, like who is telling you what to believe, right? And when you have this fear of like the afterlife or things like that, you're trying to figure out reality. That's kind of what we're all figuring out, a connection to a God or a higher understanding, all these different kinds of things. And so when you talk about the high priest, it's interesting because you look at, the universities and the departments of physics and all these different things. Well, when I went to Egypt with the Resonant Science Foundation, they're like, well, some of the discoveries being made basically changes all of these textbooks and all the things that they're teaching. And so that's like, it's like, oh my God, we have to change everything. And that's not easy. And so if you're controlling these different things, you might not want to do that. Even if this is the way it's going, even if it's wrong, it's like, well, we've gone this way forever. Now we have to rewrite everything. That's a huge kick in the nuts. And so it seems like that's what's happening. And if you look at the double slit experiment itself, it's like, okay, you guys have no idea what's going on. Nobody does. It's like when things just start disappearing and reappearing and like, it's like, what's actually happening here? This is a massive mystery. And so if we can just define our culture and these people, these leaders, whoever has influence in any capacity, to just define a culture set that is loving, caring, kind, supportive, cooperative in any way with the information you have, that's important. And if we can get these guys in and adopting those cultures, is going to be huge, but it's challenging because you're going against old school stuff. There's old school power paradigms that are doing their thing. And ideally, with these new systems of education and cooperation, we can kind of go past those things. But I wanted to throw a lot of things at you because I know we've been going for a bit, and I'll listen to you talk forever. This is amazing. But I'm going to throw a lot of things at you just to hear what you have to say, and you can take whatever you'd like. But some people talk about, I'm curious your thoughts on the Mandela effect, memory, and you can just whatever you like. Memory, gravity. What is gravity? The ascended masters, who were they? Were they real? Jesus, Buddha, Krishna? What is your thought about them in the simulation theory? And just the last thing I want to talk about is, when you talk about logical science, it is logical science where you're coming to, but it's like common sense. It should be common sense to help your community. It's common sense to want to live a joyous life. It's common sense to be inspired to live. It's common sense to know that you influence your reality. But you're being sold a different idea and you're accepting it. Like one of those ideas was when I was in high school, it's like, you got to do 40 hours a week and you get 2 weeks off a year. It's like, wait, hold on a second. I'm existing on the planet and all of you guys are signing up for 40 hours a week and 2 weeks off a year. I was like, that's messed up. I think that there's got to be a different simulation here. I think there's got to be a different choice. I don't know what it is, but that can't be the only choice. There must be a different option because that one is not good. And so if you can imagine something, you can define your own rule set of what's important to you, your own culture set, your own definition, and move forward. And then the very last thing I'll say is, the Native American elder friend of mine, David Lombert, he's like, one of his number one teachings is do 3 kind acts a day. And that kind of hacks your be it. So you're not supposed to go and tell everybody about it. That's gives the energy away. It defeats the whole purpose. Just do 3 kind acts. Don't tell anybody about it. But that's like kind of like a hack to just being it. Just be it, do that. And then I think that all of these other lessons will start to morph in. So a challenge I always give people is just do a kindness challenge, 3 kind acts, don't tell anybody, do it for a week. And like you talked about the paranormal, the weird, I sometimes refer to it as like a universal wink. It's like something weird will happen only for you to see, and you'll be the only one that registers and like, that's strange. And so that's one of the hacks. So I know that someone was coming in talking to you, been going for a while. So I've thrown all of that at you and you can elaborate on any of it or fill me in on what's going on.
Well, that was a lot, so I'll just make some comments through a whole bunch of it because we are winding up here on 2 hours, and that is that one, you mentioned people wanting to know about afterlife or whatever. Well, as consciousness, you're immortal. There is no death. Death is what happens in the simulation. Death is not for you. You're consciousness, and you are playing an avatar who will die. Well, everybody's avatar dies. If you're a player of virtual reality games, avatars die all the time, quite readily, and they just respawn in the game, and that's what we do too. So for that, the fear of death kind of goes away because there is no death once you stop identifying with the avatar and start identifying with consciousness. All right, so that's kind of one thing. We talk about the Mandela effect, where strange things can happen, changes seem to take place, and there doesn't seem to be any reason for them. And that can be all sorts of things. People sometimes has nothing to do with the Mandela effect, but sometimes people have very strange experiences where they get in their car and drive, and sometime in the middle they're kind of getting a daze, and then there's someplace like they're not even here on this planet anymore, and then the guys in the spaceships come and they have this and that, and then sooner or later they find themselves on some road, and then they're back in this reality, and they wonder what went on there. Or people come out of their house and they see a major fire, cities burning down or something. When they come back, they go do some business. When they come back, nobody knows anything about it. So people have strange experiences. You talk about just for them, maybe there's 4 or 5 of them, or maybe one, but people have these strange experiences. It could be in a group, masses of people, or it could be an individual. This is a virtual reality. It's programmed. Virtual reality or digital computing is the most flexible information system that you can imagine. Anything can be done in a virtual reality. Anything can happen. There's a few rules that says that things won't happen here if they, if they let's say are not in consonance with history and with the rule set. Well, the rule set allows for all sorts of things, and if the times that they are out of whack with history, like the person that drives off and ends up in some other reality frame and then comes back, well, as long as that only happens in the margins to individuals or small groups of people, it makes no effect. It doesn't create a problem in the simulation. It doesn't undermine the integrity of the simulation. Anything can happen in a virtual reality. Anything. And most of these things do happen as wake-up calls to those people, just to let them know by personal experience that they're living in something that is a lot stranger, a lot richer, and a lot deeper than this material reality that they thought they were living in. And that's just an eye-opener. So there's lots of things that are that way. I remember my son, who was playing Age of Empires when he was a young guy. And in Age of Empires, you start as cavemen and work your way up, to space travel. So it's an evolution game, and there's different tribes that start, and the idea is one of the tribes ends up generally taking over all the others and then going all the way to the, to the stars or something. And my son found a cheat code where he could materialize a Mercedes-Benz with a nuclear weapons launcher in the back seat and blow all his competition away with the push of a button and win the game. Of course, it wasn't fun winning that way, but it could be done. And that's just an example of how virtual realities can be strange, right out of nowhere in the cave. And, when everybody's in the cave business, digging in the dirt, trying to find a place to sleep, here's a Mercedes-Benz driving around and has a nuclear weapons launcher in the back seat and just wipes all the competition out. All right, reality can be strange, so that'll cover a whole lot of things. And that strangeness usually has a purpose, and the purpose is to just wake people up to a bigger picture. And as long as it doesn't somehow create a dysfunction in the reality, which it would if it was too many people, or if they were, right in the middle of a newscast or right in front of millions or something. But it's always a couple of people out by themselves, doing something. That's because there's a lot of uncertainty there. and nobody believes their story. So there's really no impact on the whole. So the system can get away with that. You know, there's plausible deniability. And that's how strange things happen. All sorts of strange things happen. That's how people are called by their deceased mother, you know, and the mother tells them that they're doing just fine, thank you very much. And, you know, it's her voice, and she says things that only she knows, and other such things. You know, I mean, there's lots of weird stuff happens in the world, and all of it is possible because it's a virtual reality. It's rendered. And those rendering, the system rendering, just the larger conscious system is rendering it. And they didn't program it. It was evolved. It's an evolved reality. And I'm just getting a bunch of details, but I'll try to hit your other things. Let's see, Ascended Masters. Ascended Masters is more of a metaphor than it is a reality. There's some reality to it in that there are some groups of individuals that no longer live here in this virtual reality who do work together to help people grow up and see bigger pictures. Okay. And Ascended Masters is probably as good a metaphor to stick on that as anything else. But it's not really that, you know, it's not that all the, you know, the giants that you've heard of all get together and are somewhere off in the distant non-physical clouds, you know, manipulating events and handing out goodies to the faithful and so on. It's not really like that. It's not Ascended Masters so much in a literal sense, but it's not a bad metaphor in the metaphorical sense. Don't try to make these metaphors too specific. You know, metaphors are things that describe something, often a feeling or something that's going on, and take it at that level. Don't try to then make it physical or make it too detailed. You know, if you hear a poet say, and her eyes were as deep as the deep blue sea, don't say, well, what sea was that? Seas I know are either green or brown, you know, or clear. And how deep was it? You know, you get deep enough and it gets dark and it goes black and there isn't any blue there at all. So it was really in the deep blue sea. It probably wasn't blue. You know, you can just go on and on and on, beat the metaphor to death, but that's not the point. You just confuse yourself and end up all wadded up in your intellect. You just have to let that go. Okay, Ascended Masters, all right. People in the know don't live here anymore, helping us out. Yeah, all right, that's true, but don't feed it too much specificity or you'll just end up, you know, tripping yourself up, would be my suggestion. Gravity. Gravity is just a part of the rule set. Gravity is part of the rule set. What can we say about that? You know, the rule set is the way this reality started is it started because the larger conscious system needed a reality that had consequences that mattered, a place where you could make choices and the choices count. The choices have consequences and serious consequences, not just a big chat room where pieces of conscious chat with each other all the time and there's no consequences. You don't grow up very fast there. You needed a place that has consequences, a place where you make real choices that affect yourself and others, things that you can grow up with or grow down with if you make poor choices. So that's why the reality is here. And nobody programmed it. It was started with initial conditions. That's that little ball of plasma was just the initial conditions in the program. And you know, high temperature, high pressure plasma. And when you hit the run button, the plasma starts to change according to the rule set. Gravity's part of that rule set. There's a lot of other things in that rule set. Scientists try to discover the rules. That's what scientists do. They discover little nuggets in the rule set. Say, this is the way this place works. See, this always works this way. It's a rule set, part of our rules. So that's what science is. It's digging out the rules in the rule set. So the rule set is all of the science, even the science that we don't know yet, that this reality is then evolving with. So the reality evolves and under the rule set and just becomes whatever it becomes. Okay, so it's an evolved reality. And when the evolved when the characters in it evolve in this simulation to have interesting choices, then consciousness can go play one of those characters. You're a consciousness. You're not the body. The body is just an evolved what do we call it? Avatar. Okay, so your consciousness. Don't confuse yourself with the body. Gravity is just a part of the rule set. There are no fields. You know, we talk about the gravitational field, the electric field, the magnetic field. None of those really exist. They're mathematical abstractions. There are no fields. Okay, yes, okay, I'm speaking, and my speaking creates a little electrical signal here in this mic, which runs up and comes down this wire and goes on and so on, and it gets, if I'm, say my computer is wireless, it goes out on an electric magnetic field, right, and goes to the computer. There are no fields. There's just information, and there's rules. So if I have a charge here and a positive charge and another positive charge here, and I'm holding them both there, and I'm going to let this one go, what's it going to do? It's going to move away because the two positives repel each other. But it's not because there's a magnetic field between them. It's because there's a rule that says when you have two charges, one of them is going to move away with the force, charge 1 times charge 2, divided by the square of the distance between them. It's a rule. It's just information. You don't need a field. Physicists made up fields to make it sound like it was something physical going on, but there really are no fields. If you think about it, how much does a field weigh? How many fields can you get in a bottle? You know, physical things have weight. They have, you know, they take up space. So you have something that you can't see, you can't hear, you can't smell, doesn't seem to take up any space. Yet we're supposed to say that it's real and physical. It doesn't meet any of the rules for physical. So it is really just a mathematical contrivance. We have the rule set, and this rule set works the way it works, and we can make up fields as if there were a field. And that helps us understand and use the rule set. It's a handy thing for us, but there are none of those things. So gravity is just like that. You know, about 2 years ago, the physicists thought they saw a gravity wave. They didn't measure a gravity wave. There's no such thing as a gravity wave. They measured a force. Okay, they measured a force. A force was there, and suddenly it wasn't. There was a change in the force, right? Sounds like Luke, you know, or Obi-Wan. You know, there was a change in the force, and they measured that change in the force. That's what they measured. Force is a real thing. Yes, forces are real. I mean, real in this virtual reality. It's rendered as a real thing. But you know, fields are not actually real. And when the first physicists came up with fields, the rest of the physicists thought it was kind of a cheap trick because it was just a mathematical thing that they called a field, and then everybody pretended that it was physical. But you don't need it to be physical. It's just an extra thing, you know, that isn't necessary. So gravity is just a part of the rule set. That's why it works the way it works. What else did you have on your list? My memory's kind of fading after gravity. What else did you have there on your list?
I think the last thing that I had on there was like the 3 kind acts for like hacking the being it, like your perception of like how do we get into the being it a little bit quicker.
Okay, well, one of the things, and you've kind of talked around it, and then you talked around it like go be kind, do 3 kind things. Of course, if you tell people about it and brag about it, then it's all in your ego. But you can do it and keep it in your intellect. You can say, well, I'm going to do 3 kind things. Okay, look around. Okay, that would be kind. I'll go do that. Okay, number 1, number 2, number 3. And if it all stays in your intellect, then there's really no gain other than you've helped people out. You've done something kind, and that's nice. It's a gain for them, but it's a very minor gain for you if it stays in your intellect. But the trick is that if you repeat things through repetition, things will sink from your intellect into your being level. That's why when you do an affirmation, you know, I'm going to get rid of my fear and take responsibility for my life, and you write that on your refrigerator and you repeat it, you know, 100 times every day. Well, if you look at that intellectually, you'll say, well, that's silly. You know, reading a sentence 100 times in a day isn't going to change anything in your life. But what happens, it does, because repeating that sentence 100 times in a day, that sentence moves from your intellect down to your being level, to where you're not just reading the sentence, but it becomes a part of you. So repetition is important. And repetition is one of the ways we get things that are in our intellect down into our being level. So if you want to act better and act kinder, that's nice. But keep doing it and 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 doing it. And yes, it started in your intellect. You were just trying to act kind because you thought you should. And it's not because you were kind, but you just thought you should and it would be better. But if you keep doing it enough, you'll become it. And you'll be kind. And you'll stop doing it because you had 3 of them to do today. You'll just do it because you see somebody in need. You see, so repetition is a key ingredient in moving information from the intellect down into the being level to where you are kind. So using your intellect as the initiator of this growth is a good idea. It's not that the intellect is a useful thing. It's a very powerful tool, but it's just not where the power lies. Its power is in direction. The intellect can direct you. It can direct you to be kind 10 times every day, 20 times every day, in everything you do, in all your relationships. Make it about don't make it about yourself. When you start to feel angry, say, no, I don't want to feel that way. Not that I don't want to act that way, but I don't want to feel that way. And eventually, after the 100th time you say that, you stop feeling that way. So that's kind of how you go from intellect down into the being levels, with repetition. But it has to be sincere. Even your acting needs to be sincere. If you're doing it just because, you want your friends to be impressed with how kind you are, then it's not going to help you. But if you're doing it because you think kind is a good way to be, but you're just not kind yet, well, what do they say? Fake it until you make it, right? Act it until you become it. But repetition will help you become it.
Awesome.
Well, I'm starting to cough, so I guess we're getting pretty close to the end, where my voice isn't going to take us much further.
Yeah. Well, I definitely agree with that, and I think that's a really good point. That's a awesome way to get into the being. It's simple,
Mm-hmm.
and again, just if you change your way of being to just be a kind person, everything else will shift. All these like ideas and theories and all these questions you have, and is good or bad, and how do I manifest? How do I use law of attraction? How do I meditate? What do I do? Like, if you just be kind, all of that will start to naturally sort out, because it's one of those fundamental programs. It's
right. It'll shift because you are no longer the same person.
Yeah.
Once you get something down in your being level, now you at the being level are a different person. That different person sees the whole world differently than it did before. That's why if all you're doing is acting and it stays up in your intellect, you don't change. Your behavior changes, but you don't change. As soon as you get it down into the being level, you change. And as a different person, you interpret the world differently. You see the world differently. New opportunities open up, old opportunities, go away. It's just, everything's different. And then you learn something else and it's all different again. And that's what it's like growing up. Think about when you were 3 years old and you had to grow up. Well, you grow up, and every time you change, the whole world becomes different. It's just a different place with different opportunities, different things you can do, different things you're interested in, different friends that you might want to have. You change, and that's the good thing. You just keep growing up and changing, and everything gets different all the time.
Yep. 100% agree. Well, Tom, this has been such a privilege again to speak with you. I'm so grateful for you and your work, and like the message behind it and the intention, because all the intellectual people out there, everybody in Silicon Valley, all the people using, that intellect and logical mind, which is a part of it, you're bringing it back to a being level. It's like, yes, there is intellect, but that's not the pinnacle. You know what I mean? We use that to assist this other thing, this feeling-based, this cooperation-based, this evolution of consciousness, because intellect will only take you so far, you know, and you know, so you're an amazing high priest and shepherd for moving that idea and positioning. And even if you go beyond intellect and just into common sense, use both, use intellect and common sense, you know what I mean? And then you could do things like, I don't know, like a death ritual meditation. Just think about your life. Like, what would you do if you died in a week, in a month, in 2 years? Why do you think you get permanent? What do you actually value? What are your value sets? What are your cultural sets, your rule sets? What are you passionate about? And define that for yourself. And now you're creating deliberately rather than default, right? And you've got all these options of kind of directions you can go to, but you can start really being more deliberate with the direction that you want to go. And then that's going to shepherd people into that idea, if it is harmonious, if it is caring for everybody, if it's making you happier, like you talked about at the beginning. So I'll let you close it out with anything that you want to share, or anything that you want to add. But the one question I want to ask, because I'll be upset if I don't ask it, but you talked about, like, okay, if we're in a simulation, you talked about who made it and what is it for. Have you come to any conclusions to that? Those big questions?
Sure. Yeah. That's a very basic part of this theory, and that it's the larger consciousness system is the system in charge. Now, the larger consciousness system is just all of consciousness, the conscious system. We're a piece of that. We're a piece of that conscious system. We're a chip off that old block, so to speak. And that is the fundamental reality for us. Okay. And in my books, I talk about its origins, kind of where it comes from. I start with an assumption that consciousness exists, because you cannot get outside the system of which you are a part. In other words, we're consciousness, so we can't get outside of consciousness to see what it looks like from the outside or what's on the other side of its boundary. So we have this finite consciousness system. It's not infinite. It's a finite system, and it is information system is a digital system, because digital is the low entropy way of dealing with information, because it's very flexible. And this system needed to evolve. And in my books, I start with it as just an awareness, a very primordial awareness that is not aware of anything more than that it seems to be able to exist. I exist, and I exist like this, and then I can also exist like that. I have two different states of existence that I can be in. I can have kind of this way, that way, this attitude, that attitude, just that there's some difference. And from that, everything else evolves. So after that, you can just look at how that would evolve in order to lower entropy. In an information system, it evolves by lowering entropy. A system where all the bits in the system are random has no information. That's what random means. There is no information. So entropy means more order, more organization. So as those bits get organized, that creates information. So an information system evolves by lowering its entropy. And you can make that same logical case that lowering entropy in a social system is becoming love. That's the way social systems optimize their ability, their as you say, what they can produce with what they've got. They optimize it with cooperation and caring. So it's all part of a thing. So I start back at the very beginning, start with a kind of a hand-waving conjecture about where that first consciousness awareness came from, because you can't say anything definite about it, because you can't get outside of consciousness to look back at it in a objective way. You can only look at it from being inside of it, but you can be all around inside of it. You don't have to be stuck in this little virtual reality that we call the physical universe. That's just one small part of it. There's a lot more of it that you can do. So this conscious reality, in its process of evolving, and it's in its viewpoint, it either evolves, lowers its entropy, or it dies if it raises its entropy. If it continually raises its entropy, it ends up with no information. Everything's random. So it's constantly trying to lower its entropy, which gives it more choices, more interesting things to do. So from that, it decides it needs a reality where there are more consequences in the choices so that pieces of itself can evolve more readily. Those pieces of itself are us. And then it, like I say, it starts with a initial conditions and a rule set, and here we are. So we're consciousness. It's like the player playing World of Warcraft. That player is like the consciousness, makes all the choices for the elf. The elf doesn't do anything unless that player tells it what to do, gives it a choice. So all the choices are made by the consciousness. The avatar, the elf, just follows whatever the choice is. We're like that. We are actually consciousness, a player playing an avatar. If we don't give it any choices, it just won't do anything. So we believe that we are the avatar because we came here, and there's a whole structure about how all this works, but we just came here completely embedded, completely immersed in this avatar's experience with no other intellectual experience. All we came here is with quality. And what we're doing is we are trying to reduce our entropy, to evolve our consciousness, become more spiritual, become more love-like. And as we do, that quality that we gain to our consciousness, we get to keep. Next experience we have, next experience packet, we get another avatar, and we play the game. Well, if we make good choices, now we end up with a little higher quality, and so on. So the quality is what we're here to do. We're here to become love, learn to cooperate, care. That's the point. That's what makes more choices and a more evolved system. So not only we are evolving, but as we evolve, the system evolves because we're part of the system. So if we lower our entropy a little bit and we're part of the system has its entropy lowered a little bit too. So we're part of the system's strategy for evolution. That's why the system would build a simulator for us to make more growing choices in. And we can go through all of the details, where did all the fear come from? Why are we like this? Why is this such a hateful place? And on and on and on. And they're all very logical things that just fall out of this theory. So the larger consciousness system is the programmer, but he didn't really program the reality. It's the metaphor, the programmer, the source. Larger conscious system is a source. And the larger conscious system is a real thing. It's an evolving thing. It's not done. It's a finite thing. It's just a very large system. Okay, now I was on the stage with a couple of theologians about 3 years back, and I'm doing a little talk in a Unity church in the outskirts of Atlanta, Georgia. And while I had them there, I thought I would take advantage of that fact. So I asked the two theologians to tell me what the attributes of God were. I mean, theologians, right? They got PhDs in theology. They ought to know those kinds of questions. So I said, what are the attributes of God? Now, don't give me dogma and, creed and all that junk. Just tell me what the fundamental attributes of God are. What are the fundamental characteristics and attributes? And they spent a little time huddled together, coming up with stuff and writing things down. And they came out with about 5 or 6 things that were the fundamental attributes of God. And I then proceeded to describe how each one of those things was a fundamental attribute of the larger consciousness system. So if you want that God connection, then it can be this larger consciousness system. But it's a finite system. It's not a perfect system. It can make mistakes. It has to learn and grow. It was where we were some time back. It also had fear, didn't know how to cooperate. And its teachers were us. When we were made chips off that old block because entropy reduction required it, the system had to deal with us. And in dealing with us, it had to learn that the only way to deal with us that really worked was through love. You see, everything else was dysfunctional. So the system itself had to learn that lesson. It's still evolving, and we're a part of it. So it goes on and on. So those are kind of those basic questions. So if you want to look at it from theology, then this my big toe theory of consciousness also derives God from first principles. If your God can be an imperfect, finite, a source of everything else, and doesn't have to be, perfect and infinite and forever and so on. The larger conscious system is still evolving, and we're part of that evolution. And the more we evolve, the more powerful, the more viable, the more choices the whole system has. So the whole thing is growing into something bigger and better all the time. And there is no endpoint to that. So it's not like you be a nice boy and be nice and, learn to love people, and then you get out of this hellhole and don't have to come back here anymore. That is not the way it works. When you grow up, you become love. And when you become love, you want to help. You want to be part of the solution. You don't want to escape. You want to see if you can't be of service. You don't want to escape service. You want to be of service. You don't want to get away from the hellhole. You want to see if you can't encourage that hellhole to be a little less hellish. You see, that's what it means by growing up. You don't become love and then, get out of town quickly because you don't want to, be in such a dysfunctional place. That's all self-centered. That's ego. That's not being grown up. So its system is an evolution is open-ended. It just keeps evolving. It keeps going and becoming and being and improving. And as it does, there's more and more options available. So it's just, we're part of that system. And we can only go back so far, and before we have to end up in conjecture, because we can't get out of the system to look outside of it, because we are consciousness. It has no meaning to us to get outside of consciousness. That doesn't mean anything. You can't be consciousness and get outside of consciousness. We're conscious because we're part of this larger consciousness system. So might there be other larger consciousness systems that have things? Sure, there could be, but it's all conjecture. It's not something that you can say for sure. It's not logical that there is or there isn't. It's only logic will take you to I don't know. And beyond that, it takes you to I can't know, because I'm inside and I can't know what's outside. So that's kind of the way it rolls up as far as theology goes. It gives a perfectly scientific derivation of really what is this God, this source, this, the beginning of us all. And then if you look at all the little things that come out of that, okay, we're chips off that block. We're pieces of consciousness. Oh, we seem to be made in the larger conscious system's image, aren't we? Because we're little chips of that consciousness, and God is love. Yeah, that kind of fits too. And you can go through a lot of the theology that's Christian and that's Buddhist and that's, all the different religions, and you can find that all of the fundamental things, just like these two theologists said, all the fundamental attributes that are really important, after you throw out the dogma and the creeds and that stuff, it's just like the larger conscious system. It is the source. So no programmer. It's an evolved virtual reality, but it has functions, and those functions require things like allowing us to modify future probability. That's one of the logical functions that just comes out of the way it has to work. It has to have a future probable database and a past database of all the things that had happened and all the things that could have happened and the probability that they might have happened. It's all there. And in these databases is where you get information like auras or remote viewing, or all of the stuff comes out of the database. It's all available to people. And what is it the Hindus call that? The Akashic records. So, the ancients figured a lot of this out, just because all you need to figure this out is to go inside yourself and explore consciousness. Now, you may have to do it for a lifetime, but you can figure it out. And they were just as capable of figuring it out as we were, because they had a mind. And if they had the time and didn't starve to death and, while doing it, had the time to explore it, then they could discover all the same things that anybody else can discover exploring consciousness. And that's where these ideas come from, that, oh yeah, this reality is a hallucination. Yeah, love is the answer. The Akashic records, and you get all this stuff because that's what's there. And anybody that learns to explore it will come up with different metaphors, but the same content. Because there is only, there is only one truth, but there's thousands upon thousands of paths to get to that truth through thousands different viewpoints and metaphors. So that's why I say everybody's adding to the solution. Everybody that's out there being positive is part of the solution. Doesn't matter what your metaphor is. It doesn't matter if you're doing it for Jesus or for Allah or for Buddha or for your mother, or because you just think it's a good idea. It doesn't matter any of that. It just matters that you do it. And if you do it, then you're part of the solution. And keep doing it and do more of it, because I think in the next couple of decades, there's going to be a splitting point where either we get it and we go forward in a great leap, or we slide away and get back into giving up our, finding another set of high priests to tell us what to believe. And we'll pick some other set, maybe we'll go back to having religious priests again. But I hope not. I hope not. I hope we see the big picture and can say, yeah, it's consciousness. We're it. We're evolving. We need to become love. We have no excuses. We're responsible for every choice we make. If we get angry, it's because we choose to be angry. We could choose not to be angry. But because you have that fear, which gives you that ego and those beliefs, that's why you choose to be angry. You get rid of the fear, you don't choose to be angry anymore. People can insult you and you just smile and you feel compassion for them because they're confused and misunderstand. Or they're right and you are messed up, but you're doing the best you can. That's okay too. You see, that's perfectly all right. That's another thing I might say, as long as I'm on a little roll here. And that is that the way forward does not require perfection. Don't wait until you know that it's right. A lot of people will say, well, I don't know where to start. And if I do this, well, maybe that's not right, or maybe that's not the best way. That doesn't matter. Just do it. In other words, be authentic. Work on your fear. Get rid of them. Whatever authentic is, doesn't matter. Be it. And if that's something that's ugly, well, change it. But you can't change it if you don't own it. You see, if you don't become authentic and you don't own it and you don't accept it who you are, you can't change who you are, because who you are is an image in your own mind, and you make that up as you go. You change it, but nothing really changes. You just imagine it. So you can't change yourself until you own yourself, and you can't do that unless you're authentic. But don't worry about doing something wrong. Well, what's the low entropy solution? Well, think about it, do due diligence, make your choice, let the chips fall however they may, look back at it and see if you can't learn something. Learn something that'll help you make a better choice. That's the progress for evolution, not waiting around until you're sure that you're going to do the right thing in the right way. That's a prescription for going nowhere. So just go do it. Anything. Start with being kind 3 times a day. Start with being kind once a week. Work your way up. It doesn't matter. Just start someplace and do something, and it will work itself out. It will take charge and lead you to where you need to go. Just start. You don't need to be right. You don't need the right way. Well, what's the best way to meditate? It doesn't matter what the best way to meditate is. Just meditate. Go listen to some music, go do, sit on a porch, watch trees grow, do whatever you do to meditate. But it'll change. Just do it and work at it. And then after you've done it for 6 months, say, am I learning? Have I gotten someplace? Am I a better person now? And if no, then go do something else. But you don't have to know what is the best route. What is the best thing? What books should I read? What teacher should I go? I'm so confused. I don't know where to start. Well, you're just stuck in that confusion, and you'll always be stuck, because there is no best place to start. There's only a best time to start, and that's now. That's the only thing there is that's best. And the rest of it will all take care of itself if you just, get off the dime and start doing something about it. Start working on getting rid of fear. And if you're serious about it, then you'll end up being in the right place, doing the right things in the right way. So that's the kind of the last thing I guess that I would say. Don't wait for knowledge to let you know you're doing the right thing. Just do something that feels kind, that feels good, that feels like you're helping, that you're part of the solution, and then learn from it. Did it turn out just to be a big ego trip? Well, why? Find the fear that turns on that ego. Get rid of the fear and do it again. It's not a quick trip. It's a lifetime's trip. It's actually many lifetimes trip. So it doesn't have to have fast results. Just keep at it and you will succeed. You'll find happiness, satisfaction, good relationships. They'll just happen. All you got to do is start. That's it.
That's beautiful. I totally agree. Really, really brilliant. The whole thing is amazing, and just a really brilliant ending as well. I totally agree with that. Just do something, get feedback, try again. That's why skateboarding is a good analogy, because it's like only failure, and sometimes
Right.
you get it, and like, okay, cool. Then sometimes you get it a little bit more consistently. So.
Right.
I think a lot of people get stuck with that. So really, really amazing. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for your work and spending so much time with me and sharing all that stuff. And for everybody listening, where can you have so many lectures online? People can go deeper in all this. If you're intellectual, you want to go into the physics, you share that. You have so much work out there. Where can people find out more about you?
Go to YouTube, www.youtube.com/TWCJR44. And that will get you there directly, but it's an easier route if you just go to Google and put in Tom Campbell or My Big Toe or MBT or something like that. I'll show up somewhere probably on the first page, and you can get to those things pretty easily through Google. But that's a good place to go. I've got many thousands of hours of video up there, enough to probably scare you half to death, But again, don't worry where you start. Just start and see where it goes. You can read some of the titles. I try to make them descriptive. Other than that, I have books. You can buy any place that books are sold normally. And if you don't want to buy them, but you still want to read them, you can go to Google Books. And on Google Books, they'll have a thing where you can, they say that you can like read portions of it. Like you can go to a place and say, you can read 10% of this book, to see whether or not you want to buy it. Well, when I was given the opportunity to say what percentage I wanted people to be able to read to see if they wanted to buy it, I put 100. So you can go to Google Books and go to that little section where you get to preview the book, and you can preview the whole book from page 1 to page, end, because I put 100% down there. So it's free. The books are really free on Google Books if you just want to read until you decide that you want to buy, or you don't want to buy at all. That's fine. It's the information that's important, not the buying. So that's it. And let's see, if you want to know where I'm going to be and where I talk and what's going on, I give a whole bunch of intensives now. I'm giving 3 or 4 of those a year. And what it is it's a very intensive program, lasts for about 4 days. And it's about how to get around in the larger conscious system, how to go explore, how to do all the paranormal things if you want to do those. But basically, it's not really about doing paranormal things. It's about getting into the larger consciousness system and being operative there, knowing what you're doing and how to do it and how to get your intent stronger so that you can make a difference and do the kind of things you want to do, get data out of the databases, whatever. And I use all that database and stuff about paranormal stuff just as an attractive thing to get people interested. But really what it's about is growing up. That's the secret message, because as you do these things, eventually you realize that the only way to really get there is to grow up and get rid of your fear. So You know, if you make it about doing paranormal things, you know, 100 people will want to show up. If you make it about growing up, nobody will show up at all. So you make it about paranormal things, 100 people show up, and most of them will grow up if they stay with it. So it's a trick.
Trojan horse it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So I got that going on. But anyway, I was going to say, go to MBT Events, www.mbtevents.com. And those are the people that put all these things on. And they will say where I'm going to be when and what's going on this year, next year, and the year after. So that's the schedule of me doing events places. That's about it.
Awesome. Well, this has been a real treat. I appreciate you. Have an amazing day. Thanks so much for coming on. And
You're welcome.
hopefully we'll talk again soon.
I appreciate the opportunity to help share this with you and hopefully a whole lot of other people.
It's getting out there.
That's why we're here.
Yep. Awesome.
So long.
See you guys. Thanks for watching.
Bye.